Driven to Win Audiobook presents Powder Law. Written by C Tuttle. Let's begin the story. When the evil spirit was very young, he desired to live upon the earth. Being an evil spirit, the land was too fair for his abode. So he builded himself a land upon a land. Being very young, his dwelling pleased him for a time, but like a child he soon tired of it, after which he destroyed it with a sweep of his hands. The tale is true. This place was surely made by a spirit, and would the great spirit build such a place as this? Indian legend. As proof of this legend, they point to the mauvaises terres, the badlands of eastern Montana, mute evidences of the one-time devil's playground. White men call it a freak of nature, this desolate region, peopled with shadow ghosts, grotesque architecture, not made by human hands, where the blizzards of winter howl and shriek through cave and column, and where the heat gods dance through the short summers. Freak of nature, it may be devil's playground it is. It was the summer of 1880, 9 years before Montana was admitted to the Sisterhood of States. A time when the laws of God and man were but vague, shadows of the future, or of a forgotten past. A time when right and wrong were but an individual point of view. History does not touch this period of the West, except to tell briefly of troubles with the Cheyenne and Sioux, who merely fought to repel the invader. But this tale is not of the Indian, but of another menace of that day, which is not mentioned in history. Skirting the border of the Badlands came 2 mounted men, leading a pack horse. The man in the lead, riding a tall gray horse, drew rein at the top of a small butte. He removed his sombrero and wiped the perspiration from his brow with the sleeve of his shirt. Blaze Carlin was a striking figure of a man, as he sat his horse with the ease attained by none except men who live their lives atop a horse. His hair was long and as black as the proverbial raven's wing, except for a strip, at least 2 inches wide of snow-white hair, which began at the center of his forehead and ended at the crown of his head. From this peculiarity, he received his nickname. His forehead was broad, his cheekbones prominent, and a generous mouth smiled from beneath a high-arched nose. He was as bronzed as a savage. In fact, at first glance, one would have called him a Sioux, but there was a hint of Celtic blood in his upper lip and mouth, and his eyes, a slaty gray, did not fit the rest of his features nor coloring. It was as if an artist had used a Sioux model, painting in an Irish smile and blue-gray eyes, and finished it off by drawing a full brush of white through the center of the hair. The other man was small and wiry, bearded to the eyes, which were as black and luminous as jet beads. His nose was hooked, like the beak of an eagle, while Blaze Carlin was dressed in the height of cowboy fashion. This little man, Frenchy, ditto, wore an old, half-fringed buckskin shirt, plaid, blanket pants, and short boots. Across the fork of their saddles, both men carried sharp as rifles. Frenchy ditto rode up beside Blaze, took out a plug of tobacco and a heavy clasp knife, and began to cut a pipeful of tobacco. "Bimeby we strike to town, eh, Blaze?" Blaze Carlin nodded, but continued to stare ahead. He brushed his hand across his eyes and turned his head. "I reckon so, Frenchy. This heat kinda makes things look queer, and this danged country makes you see things what ain't heat. But I thought I seen 7 men riding toward the sun. Maybe they was buffalo, but I don't think so. You got de good eye," nodded Frenchy. "I'm make de bet that she's not be de buffalo." Blaze smiled at his companion. He had first met little Frenchy ditto in a saloon near Deadwood, a saloon filled with powder smoke and struggling men. He had seen Frenchy empty his pistol and then fling himself headlong into the muzzles of spouting pistols, slashing with his knife and yelling like a Comanche. The odds were sadly against Frenchy. Therefore Blaze accepted part of the battle. Frenchy had been scored in several places, but Blaze managed to get him to the hitch rack, where they got mounted and rode out of the town. "Where you headed for?" Blaze had asked. "Someplace," said Frenchy, vaguely. "I'm in Tix town. She's not be friend to me, and you, pardner." "Where you go?" Someplace, grinned Blaze, and they galloped out of town, headed north. Blaze Carlin was a gambler, but an honest one. He had no visions of making a big stake. Gambling to Blaze was an obsession rather than a profession. He knew the cattle business, knew that his riding and roping ability would earn him a job in any cow country. Money meant nothing to him, except a chance to pit his judgment against other men. He had ridden away with Frenchy Ditto for the simple reason that he knew the town would be against him for his part in the battle, and partly because he admired the heart of a man who would pit his knife against pistols. He did not ask Frenchy the reasons for the fight, because it was none of his affair, and Frenchy did not explain. It was merely an incident. Frenchy was utterly indifferent as to his destination. Blaze suggested Medora. "But gosh, that's the place," declared Frenchy. "How about heading up into Montana, where the new railroad is coming through?" asked Blaze. "We go there sure," exclaimed Frenchy. "I'm lack to see the railroad," Blaze laughed. "Ain't you got no choice, Frenchy?" "To go with you," grinned Frenchy, and the partnership pact was sealed. For miles they had skirted the Badlands, seeking to strike into the big cattle ranges, but as yet they had found no signs of human habitation. Frenchy lighted his pipe, and they rode on. About half a mile farther on they came to a brushy coulee, and partly hid away in the brush they could see the half-log, half-mud cabin of a squatter. "Hidden, closer to civilization," observed Blaze, pointing at the cabin. Frenchy drew slowly at his unlighted pipe. His eyes squinted in a steady focus on some object. "What do you see?" asked Blaze. Frenchy did not reply, but spurred his horse down the edge of the coulee. Blaze, after another look, followed him, driving the pack horse ahead of him. A trail, hammered hard by cloven hoofs, led straight down through the brush to the rear of the cabin. Near the side of the cabin grew a stunted cottonwood tree, and hanging to a large branch by a noosed rope was the figure of a man. Blaze and Frenchy dismounted and walked around the tree. The body was tightly bound with ropes, and pinned to the breast of the dead man's shirt was a square of paper on which was crudely printed. Frenchy folded his arms and puffed loudly on his pipe while Blaze read it aloud. "You spake true," nodded Frenchy. "We are close to decivilized folks, Blaze." "That V would be for vigilantes," mused Blaze. "Did you ever hear of them, Frenchy?" Frenchy shook his head. "They were a bunch of fellas who takes the law in their own hands," explained Blaze. "When the law can't or won't do the job right, then the vigilantes steps in," mumbled Frenchy. "She's hanged a bad man, eh? All the time she's do no ting to the good man?" "I don't reckon they've supposed to," said Blaze. "When the vigilante she's hone's man, she's only take away the bad man, eh? I make tea, ink she's bad ting if the bad man, Mac himself vigilante. At you think, Blaze?" The crude wisdom of Frenchy had picked out the flaw of the vigilante system, a system which was efficient in bringing terror to outlawry in the Old West, but which went beyond its intention and became the weapon of unscrupulous men, who used it to further their own ends. "I reckon you were right, Frenchy," admitted Blaze, after thinking over Frenchy's words. "Maybe they won't thank us for burying their victim, being as they kinda leaves them hanging around as a warning, but we'll take a chance." They cut the rope. The man was well past middle age, his hair and beard almost white. Blaze examined him closely. One of his legs lay in an unnatural position, and Blaze discovered that the man was a cripple. He examined the man's hands and got to his feet as Frenchy appeared with a shovel and a pick. "Why you tink they string him up for?" asked Frenchy. "Bad man. You tink." "He was a cripple, Frenchy." Blaze spoke softly, as if afraid the dead man might hear. "His knee is all crooked, and his hands are tied in knots from rheumatism. He could neither run nor hold a gun." Frenchy turned away and began digging. Blaze watched him for a time and then picked up the shovel. "I'm tink," observed Frenchy, leaning on his pick. "I'm mad like, for the vigilant. Maybe she's the law, but just the same, me, And you think alike, Moss always, nodded Frenchy. Neither of them knew anything of the burial service. The victim of the vigilantes was rolled in an old blanket and buried beside the old cottonwood tree. The interior of the cabin did not disclose the man's identity. It was crudely furnished and did not show long occupancy. There was no sign of any firearms, and the food supply was low. They fastened the door and rode on. The sun was an hour high when they reached a large stream of water flowing down a small valley. The stream was lined with willow and cottonwood, which cut a green gash through that sun-baked country. Several head of range cattle whirled out of the willows at their approach, wild as partridge. We were into the cow country at last, smiled Blaze, as they rode into the willows. Frenchy nodded. They followed a trail through the brush and drew up at the bank of the stream. Somebody make this sign, observed Frenchy, pointing at a sign on a big cottonwood, which grew near the bank. Blaze rode in close to the tree and read the notice aloud. Warning. This land bellum timilon terminate. Black Moras. Black Mora. Frenchy snorted his disgust. Shall we move on? Asked Blaze. I'm in make the wet camp today, declared Frenchy. I'm no want Black Moras land I'm do want to camp. We stay. I've heard of him, said Blaze. A man in Deadwood told me something about him. Big cattleman, I reckon. Wants to run the country. Maybe the country she's no run, grinned Frenchy, taking the swing rope off the pack. We take chance. Both of the men owned camp-broke horses, and there was no need of hopple or picket rope. The 3 horses moved up the stream, cropping at the green grass, while the men prepared camp. Blaze happened to glance across the creek just in time to see a rider disappearing over a ridge. He was close enough for Blaze to see that the man was looking at their camp. One of Black Moras' spies, said Blaze, pointing him out to Frenchy, but the man disappeared before Frenchy could locate him. We'll give the horses an hour on the grass and then tie 'em up, stated Blaze. You never can tell what kind of a hornet this Mora is, and we might need a horse under us real quick. Bagosh, I'm prepared for the night. Frenchy's beard and moustache seemed to fuzz out like the whiskers on an angry bobcat. He patted his pistol butt. I'm hard man for make move, but just as you say, Blaze. Maybe she's the good idea for have the horse handy, for the reason that maybe we have to chase this Black Mora, eh? Blaze laughed, but Frenchy was serious. In anything, except to fight, the little Frenchman had the heart of a child, but the prospect of trouble seemed to add inches to his height, and his black eyes became bead-like in their intensity. They cooked and ate their supper, and then Blaze caught the horses, tying them near camp. Blaze had been keeping a close watch across the creek, expecting trouble to come from that direction, if at all. Suddenly, he heard Frenchy grunt softly. 2 men had ridden in from the rear, making no sound on the soft trail, and were almost to the fire before Frenchy saw them. One was a tall, swarthy, black-moustached person, with an arrogant expression. The other was a trifle smaller, with mouse-colored hair, one empty eye socket, and a badly scarred face. Both men carried rifles and wore pistols. Blaze looked them over carefully. The tall man, after staring hard at Blaze, pointed at the sign, his long, bony forefinger quivering as he seemed to put his soul into the gesture. You see that sign? He grunted. Still have in my sight, nodded Blaze. The man seemed shocked to think that Blaze had seen it, and still disregarded its warning. His hand dropped to his side, and he frowned at Blaze. Frenchy was standing near the other rider, his legs braced far apart, his unlighted pipe between his lips. This here land belongs to Mora, stated the tall man. Who is Mora? Asked Blaze easily. Black Mora. You don't know that nigger? Asked Frenchy. The man turned his head and shot a withering glance at Frenchy, but Frenchy's glare was just as deadly, and the man turned back to Blaze. You get off this land. Mora don't allow nobody here. They'll give you. He glanced around at the meager outfit, and turned back to Blaze. "I'll give you half hour to get off this ranch." Blaze rubbed his chin and considered the order. "You work for Black Mora?" he asked. "I sure do." "Know him well enough to take a message to him?" "I sure do." "Then tell him that Blaze Carlin told him to go to Mac the message from Frenchy Ditto, too," added Frenchy. Mac her read the same. The tall man's eyes narrowed for an instant, and his shoulder seemed to hunch. Blaze Carlin's, hand crooked at the wrist, and his Colt .44 split the stillness of the creek bottom. The tall man's arm swung forward, seemed to crumple at the elbow, and his pistol fell to the ground. At the first motion of the draw, Frenchy had sprung forward and upward, grasping the other man by the belt and yanking him off his horse. The man drew a gun as Frenchy tore him loose from the saddle, but the gun went spinning into the bushes. Blaze paid no attention to Frenchy and the other man. The tall man's rifle slid to the ground, and his frightened horse backed until its rump struck a tree, which made it jerk forward, almost unseating its rider, whose arm seemed to occupy all his attention. Frenchy had flung his man to the ground and pinned his arms. "Bargosh, I'm hope for the good fight, but I make mistake," grunted Frenchy. "You'll have a chance to. Use your left arm for a while," stated Blaze, but the tall man did not reply. Frenchy let his man get up, but kept a hand twisted in his collar. "You heard the message we sent to Black Mora, did you?" asked Blaze. "Now, maybe you retained enough to carry it to him." "You goin' to turn dem loose?" asked Frenchy. "Bagosh, you got soft heart." "Whoa!" Frenchy yanked his man backward and proceeded to administer the toe of his boot to the spot designated by precedent for such a proceeding, and alternately yanked and booted the man all the way to his horse, which the man managed to mount. "Vamoose," snapped Blaze. The men rode away, one of them hugging a shattered right arm, and the other standing high in his stirrups and trying to keep his frightened horse to a comfortable walk. Frenchy proceeded to shave a pipeful of tobacco and lighted it from the fire embers. He turned and looked at Blaze, who was leaning against a tree, watching in the direction of the disappearing horseman. "Blaze," Frenchy puffed furiously. "Blaze, I'm ink dem two fella get sore from us. You mac. Good shot for break his arm." "Eh? Good shot. Lucky shot. Lucky shot. Frenchy lucky for him. I never shot at his arm. You had a lot of nerve to yank that other fella plumb off his horse." "Nerve me?" Frenchy laughed heartily. "Why, Blaze, I'm so scared that I'm forget my gun." "Ho, ho, ho." They both laughed. Frenchy had seen Blaze shoot the heads off sage hens, and Blaze had seen Frenchy fighting with a knife against roaring pistols. But neither was seeking glory in the other's eyes. "We'll move back a ways as soon as it gets dark," stated Blaze. "This ain't the end of it, Frenchy. Maybe we better pack up and pull out." "None!" Frenchy shook his head vehemently. "I'm back up a little, but no pack to horse and run away. We got 2 rifle, 2 pistol more den we have before they come." "Ho, ho, ho!" Frenchy collected the 4 guns, which were loaded. The rifles were Sharps, Swatch, the ammunition of which fitted their rifles, but the 2 pistols would be useless to them after the rounds were fired, as they both used smaller caliber than those carried by Blaze and Frenchy. Blaze kept a close watch until dark, and then they moved their blankets farther back from the creek after throwing more wood on the fire. But there was no further sign of Black Mora or his men that night. They were up at daylight. Blaze started to get breakfast, while Frenchy climbed up into the branches of a cottonwood, where he perched like an owl with his rifle across his lap. Blaze laughed at Frenchy, but Frenchy was serious. "Mac T," said Frenchy. "I'm Mac T." He broke off, rose a little higher, and swung the heavy rifle to his shoulder. A moment later, the big rifle bellowed. Blaze sprang across the fire and picked up his rifle. "What you shooting at?" he demanded. Frenchy extracted the empty cartridge, and blew into the breech of his rifle before replying. "Dey son of a gun go creep. Creep along to get behind a big rock." Ho, 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 pushed the dirt in his face. He turned over Lackbund. Frenchy threw up his rifle and fired as it leveled. He waved the cloud of smoke away with a sweep of his hand. "Dat's another one, Blaze. I miss him pretty close, I tell you dat." "Whoa!" Frenchy shifted excitedly. "Blaze, you packed the cayuse. Quick, I make to ink that son of a gun has the army work for him. I hold them off, I tell you." Bullets began to whiz through the foliage and thump into the tree trunks. Blaze hurriedly packed the horse and then threw on the two saddles, while Frenchy swore alternately in English and French and punctuated his oaths with lead from his old sharps. All set, Frenchy called Blaze, swinging into his saddle. Frenchy fired again and swung down to the ground. "Go straight down this side," ordered Frenchy. "I'm have them stopped." They rode away as swiftly as possible, keeping in the willows. For a while, it looked as if they had thrown off the attackers, but as soon as they crossed the creek and struck into more open country, they found that there was a strong possibility of more trouble. One bunch of horsemen were behind them, while another bunch had circled into the hills to head them off. They pulled up and considered the matter. A long-range bullet dusted the ground at their horses' feet, fired from the bunch in the hills. They could see the riders across the creek as they checked up at the edge of the stream. "That we do now fight?" asked Frenchy. Blaze considered. The horsemen in the hills were still swinging around, as if to join forces with those at the creek. "They've headed us off in that direction," observed Blaze, "and it appears to me that they were danged awful sure that we want to go that away. Well, we'll take a chance and go up the creek instead. We may have to lose our pack horse. My blanket she's on the pack, and I stay wit my bed," declared Frenchy. "Day pack horse run lack." They turned and spurred into a gallop, traveling parallel to the creek, but in open country. There were 6 men in the bunch which had circled them, and 5 more in the crowd at the creek. Now they joined, and came racing up the same side of the creek. Both Blaze and Frenchy were well mounted, but the pack animal, seeming to sense the need of haste, passed Frenchy, who was leading it. "Go so fast as you like," yelled Frenchy, and threw the rope across the pack, turning the animal loose. They swung over a knoll and around the side of a steep slope, jumping mesquite and greasewood, and found themselves a short distance from a rambling ranch house, which stood in the center of a clearing about 3 acres in extent. A long, low stable and a big pole corral were between them and the house, and a pole fence surrounded the house and barn. The center pole of the bars was in place, and the pack animal tried to jump it, but the horse was not built for hurdling and came to grief. Blaze's horse cleared the bar and the struggling pack animal, and Frenchy's horse barely clicked the rail as it went over. The pack animal struggled to its feet, kicked at a loose rope, and galloped after its master. Blaze and Frenchy swung down at the door of the ranch house, turning the horses loose, and then went straight toward the open stalls of the barn, as if they had lived there all their lives. Came a whirl of dust and the panting horses, as the pursuers clattered up to the bars. Blaze threw up his rifle and sent a bullet past their heads, and they spurred to one side out of sight. Blaze kicked open the door, almost in the face of a fat Indian squaw who was coming to the door to see what was going on. She stared blankly at the 2 men. "Whose place is this?" asked Blaze. "Black Mora," replied the stolid aborigine. "Where is he?" "I don't know. He ride away with men." The squaw spoke in halting English. "This is going to be a hard place to leave," observed Blaze, but Frenchy was chuckling as he leaned over a rough table. "Look, Blaze," he called. "Here. Here's plenty shell for de rifle. Fill up de belt, and use de pocket for de rest. She's good place to find." Blaze stepped over to the table and filled his belt from fresh boxes. Frenchy stuffed his pockets full, and then put more inside his shirt. "Bah, gosh, she's going to be one good fight, I'm tell you, Blaze." Blaze stepped to a window and saw a man running to get behind the barn. Another was stooped low, running farther to the left where another old building would give him cover. Blaze looked around the room, which was about 20 by 30 feet in size. There were 4 doors, 2 opening outside, and the other 2 were connected with the rooms at each end. All the doors were fitted with heavy bars. It was only a moment work to throw the bars into place. The squaw watched Blaze, but her fat face expressed no emotion. The strange doings of the white men did not cause any wonder in her one-idea brain. Blaze grinned at her lack of interest. "You like Black Mora?" he asked. The squaw glanced at Blaze and then spat disgustedly. "Either she hates him, or she don't like my question," grinned Blaze. The windows, of which there was one at each side of the room, were composed of 2 small panes of glass set in crude frames. Frenchie dumped the extra cartridges onto a shelf near the rear window, placed his pistol beside them, and calmly knocked one of the panes of glass out. Then he produced his plug of tobacco and clasp knife and then grinned at Blaze, who was looking at the squaw. "Blaze, you better knock out the little window and get ready for fight. Plenty time for de love Mac after de will man she's went away." "Ho, ho, ho!" Frenchie chuckled heartily over his crude joke. Blaze went back to the window and poked out one of the panes, only to have a bullet ricochet off the barrel of his rifle and buzz across the room like an angry bee. "Ho, ho, ho," chortled Frenchie. "Day dance she is begin, Blaze. Hope she don't all dance from your side, because my feet she's itch for get busy." Blaze fired and was rewarded by a yell from the barn. "Bar gosh, you don't miss dat fella," chuckled Frenchie. Can tell de yelp from de old Sharp's bullet. She thump. Bullet tore through the mud chinking of the cabin near Frenchie's window, and Blaze turned to see Frenchie with both hands clapped to his face, dancing a circle. He sprang across the room and grasped Frenchie's arm. "Where'd it hit ye?" he asked. "The mud daubers turo dirt in my eye. Go back to your own side. Dis fella belonged to me, bagosh." The squaw had sat down on the floor at the end of the room and watched the 2 men. She glanced at the wall, where a bullet tore into some medicine bottles on a crude shelf, but there was neither wonder nor anxiety in her face. Frenchie crouched flat against the wall, leaning out far enough to fire and then leaning back to reload. The attack was growing stronger now, as the Black Mora crowd found points of vantage, and they searched the house with lead from every angle. Blaze was shooting methodically, while Frenchie grew voluble with French epithets and drilled his initials on a shed door, where 3 men had fired at his window from a loophole in the logs. 2 men had attempted to reach the door of a small building about 60 yards from Blaze, but both of them failed. Blaze could see no reason for anyone sacrificing his life to reach this building. Another man had come in from the rear of this building, which was built on such an angle that Blaze could only see the front and one side, and had sneaked in on the far side to the front. His hand shot out in an attempt to lift the barred door, in which attempt he had succeeded, but Blaze shot carefully, and the man's hand went out of commission. The heavy door swung open, but no man seemed foolhardy enough to try to reach the shelter of the interior. Luckily for both Blaze and Frenchie, the bullets were all coming from one direction. There was no cover from one side. Consequently, they were able to stay close to the window, without danger of crossfire. The remaining panes of glass were long since gone, and the casing and log ends on one side of each window had been chewed to a pulp with rifle bullets. Occasionally a bullet would splinter through the doors, but the thick seasoned wood mushroomed the soft lead until it was practically harmless. "Day gun she get hot," observed Frenchie, grinning across at Blaze. "How many you get?" Blaze shook his head. "I don't know, Frenchie. Got 2 down in sight, and I put a bullet through one fella's hand. Couple more I kinda figured to ache up a little, but they seem to keep shootin'. I've not got none for sure." Frenchie seemed downhearted over this fact. "I'm got 3 inside the little house, one behen a pile of poles, and another one she's getting hole in the ground. I am mighty ink Frenchie ditto, poor shot." He leveled his rifle and fired again. "Ho, ho!" "The son of a gon," she tried to come out of the hole. "I'm Mech, bet she's changed her mind." Blaze nodded and grinned. His rifle barrel was so hot he could hardly hold it. Suddenly, the squaw got to her feet. She sniffed at the air. Blaze watched her. "Fire come?" she said slowly. "House afire." Blaze sniffed, but the room was hazy with powder smoke. "I smell," stated the squaw. "Black Mora set house on fire." "The same of which complicates things," observed Blaze. "I'm at tea." "Think we trapped," said Frenchie. "Must go way pretty soon, Blaze." A trickle of smoke began to show under one of the connecting doors, and Blaze stepped over to smell of it. "Wood smoke, Frenchie. They set fire to our little fort." Blaze stepped back to his rifle, but there was no one in sight. Frenchie peered out of his window, but there was no sign of his targets. Black Mora had decided to smoke out his quarry. Blaze watched the squaw walk to the farther corner of the room, where she dragged a crude bunk away from the wall. She threw aside a pile of old sacks and skins and lifted a trap door. "Cellar?" queried Blaze. "You come," ordered the squaw, and started down a short ladder. Blaze and Frenchie each took a last look from the windows, and, as there was no sign of the besiegers, they followed the squaw. Instead of a cellar, they found a narrow, low tunnel shored up with small timbers. It was pitch dark, and the tunnel was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. But they followed in single file behind the fat squaw. It seemed as if they had gone a mile, when the squaw stopped and straightened up. Blaze reached out his hand and felt the rungs of a pole ladder, up which the squaw had started. Came the creak of boards, and the tunnel was flooded with light, as the squaw lifted another trapdoor, letting them into a small log room. The open door gave them a view of part of the house they had just left. "This is where them fellas wanted to get," whispered Blaze understandingly. "No wonder they took a chance. They could go through the tunnel, open the trap under that old bunk, and nail us both." "Sure, Tay," nodded Frenchie. "Grand scheme, Blaze. Look at the house burn." The ranch house was composed of 3 large rooms, and the fire had been started in the north end. Black Mora had taken no chances in trying to smash the connecting door after seeing the defenders' shooting ability, so he decided on the Indian method of routing them out. Blaze and Frenchie crouched near the door, watching the flames eat into the seasoned logs. One end of the house was burning fiercely, and it was only a question of a short time until the whole building would be in flames. The squaw sat down in a corner, stolidly watching the fire as if having no interest in it whatever. Blaze and Frenchie knew that at least 6 rifles covered the front and rear doors of the ranch house, and were also fairly sure that the men behind those rifles believed that their quarry must soon break for liberty. Blaze examined the walls of their room, but there was no exit except the half-open door. The squaw looked at Blaze and seemed to understand what he was looking for. Flames were soaring from the ranch house. Came the shrill nicker of a horse. A man's voice cried an order, but above it all came the splintering crash as the pole and mud roof of one end of the ranch house collapsed. The squaw got to her feet and backed into a corner. The 2 men watched her as she fumbled along the chinking between 2 logs. Suddenly she shoved with her shoulder, and a section composed of 2 logs swung outward. The aperture was large enough to allow a man to pass through, and through it they could see their 3 horses near the barn, watching the fire. The logs had been cut in such a way, and so hinged that they could only be opened from the inside. Evidently Black Mora had more need of an exit than an inlet. "You go," urged the squaw. "Everybody look fire." Blaze held out his hand to her, but she seemed ignorant of a handshake. He slipped a large opal ring from his finger and handed it to her. She understood this and smiled happily. It was Blaze Carlin's mascot, but he gave it willingly. He and Frenchie slipped out the aperture, and the logs closed behind them. Going straight to their horses, they could keep the small cabin between them and Mora's men, unless the men had moved lately. Ducking low, they raced for the horses, but no shot followed them. It was but a moment's work to lead their horses around the corner of the barn, and there they found a huddled group of saddle horses, snorting from fright of the fire. Frenchy chortled gleefully, and wanted to cut the saddle cinches. But Blaze stopped him. He was not afraid of Mora's men catching him once they got away, and there was a chance that the gang might believe that they perished in the flames. Frenchy grumbled at losing the chance of spoiling all possibility of pursuit, but spurred out of the clearing, riding swiftly down the creek, around the first curve and into the hills, while behind them, black cloud of smoke pillared into the sky. Ho, ho, ho! Frenchy threw back his head and whooped gleefully. Nobody she's allow on Mora's land, eh? Blaze, you ever hear about Nero? Blaze shook his head. She's lack to be the boss too, explained Frenchy. She's fired a town of Rome and den she feedle. She done what? Asked Blaze. She done what? Asked Blaze. Feedle, feedle, feedle. Frenchy imitated the motions of playing a fiddle. She's make music for the fire. Must been loco, Frenchy. Make good shepherd. Eh, Blaze? Make a good partner for Black Mora. Bargosh, that's the fact. Bot crazy. No man can run this country alone. Maybe she make big try, but bime be somebody she's come along and no run. Bam! One man no run. Another man she see, and she's quit run. Bime be everybody quit, run. Den the man who run the country must run far, or the country run over him. Blaze laughed at the wisdom of Frenchy Ditto. Back of Frenchy's black eyes was a keen mind, a brain capable of doing bigger things than fighting battles in border countries or trapping for furs. The country needed keen minds, but Frenchy Ditto loved action too well to live long enough in any one place. Blaze was old drifter. The clink of poker chips, the lure of the green cloth was in his blood. His long, muscular fingers itched for the feel of playing cards. But above it all was an indefinite longing to do something worthwhile. Blaze was better educated than the majority of cowboys. He did not remember his mother, and his father was but a hazy, unreal sort of a person. Thrown on his own at an early age, he had grown to manhood, unsullied by his environment. He rode hard, drank moderately, and fought ferociously. But something in his soul seemed to cleave a deep line between right and wrong. Men said that Blaze Carlin was too honest to be a gambler, and honor, conferred to few gamblers in those wild days. To the six-shooter has been the glory of winning the West. But it took brains behind the gun to do this. Perhaps the six-shooter did much to hold back the West the six-shooter, plus lax laws, or no law at all. Very often a sheriff was elected for his pistol ability, regardless of his fitness for the office, and only too often they combined with evil powers to loot behind the mantle of the law. At times an honest sheriff was elected when the law-abiding element was in the majority. But the majority were unable to give their assistance when the lawless combined against his authority. Wolf Butte was a county seat in a territorial county, a county so vast that a man could ride for a week and never reach a boundary line. Range cattle mingled with the buffalo. Men were neighbors at 50 miles. Towns were very few and far between, with Wolf Butte the metropolis. Therefore Wolf Butte flourished, roughly speaking, and more roughly acting. It was a town of saloons, dance halls, gambling places, where hard-bitted men came to revel in wine, painted women, and coarse song. A town where morals were flung to the winds, like a deck of unlucky playing cards. There was a certain moral element, an element composed of hard-riding, God-fearing men, but they were woefully in the minority. Day or night, the long hitch racks of the main street were lined with saddle horses, standing patiently, often for days at a time, while their masters lounged in the smoke-festooned gambling houses and pitted their weak wisdom against games which did not operate for anyone's health. Wolf Butte lived fast living today, for tomorrow might never come. Into this town rode Blaze Carlin and Frenchy Ditto, rode past the gambling halls, where the rattle of poker chips sang a siren song to Blaze's ears. To Frenchy, it only meant mingling with other men, a drink or two, much useless argument, and perhaps trouble. But Frenchie welcomed it all. He liked the drink or two, loved an argument, and fighting only added zest to life. They went straight to a livery stable and turned their horses over to the stableman. On the wall of the grain room was a prominent, crudely painted sign. "Leave your guns here or turn. To them over to the sheriff. To them over to the sheriff." This means you Blaze read it aloud and turned to the stableman. "Does that sign mean what she says?" The man laughed and shook his head. "I reckon not, pardner. You see, we ain't got no sheriff. Him and his undersheriff got run out by the vigilantes. What did they do that for?" "I dunno." The man shook his head and turned away. It was evident that he did not care to discuss the matter. "Lack, I'm say before," observed Frenchie. "She's the good thing at the right time. I'm hungry inside, Blaze. We better find the ham and the egg, eh?" Blaze agreed readily. Morris' gang had interrupted their breakfast, and they had not made a stop since leaving Morris Ranch, which was about 12 miles from Wolf Butte. They walked down the dusty street to a restaurant. Riders came galloping into the street, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Freight wagons creaked in, the mules dusty and tired, the drivers bitterly profane. Here were no traffic laws. An empty wagon, with a torn schooner cover, swerved to the left of a heavy freighter, and their front wheels locked. The freighter screamed an oath and swung his whip at the other driver, while the teams lunged wildly. In the swirl of dust, both riders got to the ground and fought each other like madmen, while a gathering crowd cheered them. The veil of alkali dust made the fighters pair as an out-of-focus picture. Suddenly the freighter went down. The other driver sprang to his seat, backed his vehicle away from the heavy freighter, and drove away, hatless, coatless but triumphant, while willing hands helped the freighter back into his wagon. The street cleared, and the fight was forgotten. At the door of a restaurant, Blaze stopped and threw up his head. The gambling fever was upon him again. Directly across the street was a huge sign. Eureka Salonen, and Witsuan, and Liti, Gambling Palace. A violin screeched an old jig tune. An out-of-tune piano was jangling notes, while above it all came the husky voice of a woman, singing Suwannee River. Her voice broke harshly on a high note, and a burst of coarse laughter showed that the audience had been amused. Bouncer propelled a quarrelsome drunk out of the wide door, and the unfortunate one sprawled into the street from a well-directed kick. All the saloon doors were double width, wide open, so as not to obstruct any rider who was in too much of a hurry to dismount for his drink. "She's a bad town," declared Frenchie as they sat down at a greasy table where linen and silverware were unknown. "Man for breakfast every morning, stranger," smiled a bearded man at the next table. "Everything goes in Wolf Butte. Railroads, within 70 miles of here now, and the stakes sure cuts close to the main street." Came a scattered volley of pistol shots from up the street, and several men rode swiftly past the restaurant. "More punchers in for a bust," observed the stranger. "They sure does salute the town since the sheriff hit for the hills." "Vigilantes run him out?" asked Blaze. According to the notice tacked on his door. The stranger attacked his meal, and Blaze and Frenchie turned back to their own business of eating. More men drifted in to eat, and the place was filled when Blaze and Frenchie paid for their meal and went across the street to the Eureka. The games were running full blast. Blaze waited until a man cashed in his poker winnings and then slipped into his place, tossing a piece of gold to the dealer, who shoved the chips across the table. Frenchie leaned against the bar, his keen eyes taking in the place. Painted women, with scarlet lips and painted cheeks, dressed in cheap finery, mingled with the men, their shrill laughter, audible above the roar of male conversation. Two fiddlers added to the general confusion by screeching out a hoedown. 3 bartenders dished out cheap whiskey, while rough waiters hurried hither and yon, carrying orders to the games or to those unable to navigate from table to bar. Frenchie was looking toward the door as 3 men came in. The man in the lead was inches taller than any man in the room. His neck was so short that it appeared his head was set flush with his shoulders, his long arms swinging even below the bottom of his holstered gun. His face was like a piece of carved mahogany, carved to a perpetual sneer, and his eyes were black as ink, and without depth. A lock of greasy hair curved down over his forehead from under the back-flung brim of his sombrero. He wore a beaded vest, heavy with brass ornaments, and below it flashed the two heavy silver buckles of his ornamented belt. His chaps were heavily ornamented with silver studs and carved rosettes, and the spurs above his high heels were heavy with silver and gold. He stopped and swept the crowd with his eyes, his glance traveling from man to man. He only gave Frenchy a passing glance, and then turned to the bar. The two men stepped in beside him. A bartender hurried to take their order. The big man slopped the liquor on the bar indifferently, and then spat out his drink. "Rotten!" he snapped, and flipped the uncorked bottle off the bar under his feet, where it gurgled its contents along the rough floor. "Gimme good whiskey. You!" he roared at the bartender. "None of that pison." The bartender placed another bottle on the bar, along with fresh glasses. "That's the best in town, Mora," said the bartender. "Don't tell me what's the best," growled Mora. "I'll do the talking." Frenchy studied the big man. So this was Black Mora. Frenchy looked at the huge, hairy wrists, the big, powerful hands. The shoulders of an ape. Mora's forehead was broad and intelligent, but the back of his huge head was almost flat. His hips were narrow, and his feet small. Frenchy noted that Mora's gun had a beautifully carved handle. In Frenchy's mind there was not the slightest doubt but that Black Mora was deadly efficient. The two men with him were ordinary cowpuncher types, well trained to follow their master. Mora turned and saw Frenchy looking at him. There was nothing offensive in Frenchy's attitude. Rather, he was admiring this huge piece of fighting machinery. Mora placed his glass on the bar and turned toward Frenchy. "What you looking at?" he growled, eyes half closed. Frenchy feigned not to have heard the question and turned his head slowly toward the poker table. Blaise Carlin was looking at Mora, and Frenchy exchanged glances, and Frenchy turned back to Mora. "Did you hear what I said?" growled Mora. Frenchy smiled and shook his head. "Day little question she's get lost in all dis talk. Sorry." "Frog eater," rumbled Mora, stepping closer and glowering at Frenchy. Blaise moved his chair back from the table slowly, watching Mora. As Blaise's right hand drew back from his chips, he touched a heavy glass beer mug. His fingers twined into the handle, and he leaned forward in his chair. Frenchy had not moved. Mora's throat rumbled a curse, and his right hand shot out to grasp Frenchy by the throat. But Blaise shot to his feet and flung the beer mug with such unerring aim that it caught Black Mora over his right ear. When the latter's hand was brushing Frenchy's chin, Mora dropped like a log. For a moment nobody spoke, nor made a move. Frenchy leaned against the bar, the butt of his pistol braced against his right hip, covering Morris's two men. "Ho, ho, ho, ho!" he chuckled. "Day beer mug saved Morris' life. I am to kill him when he touch me, de big pig." Mora stirred, and then sat up, staring vacantly. His eyes fastened on Frenchy and the muzzle of the unwavering pistol. He put his hand to his head and drew it away, stained with blood. His eyes traveled around the saloon, as if seeking the man who had hit him. He got to his feet and leaned against the bar, his eyes narrowed to mere slits. Frenchy did not move a muscle. The room had gone suddenly still. Then a woman laughed harshly, and Black Mora's muscles seemed to jerk from the insult. It was as if someone had laughed when a king fell. Blaise stepped away from the poker table and walked halfway to Mora. The two men looked at each other for several moments, and then Blaise spoke evenly. "I throwed that glass. You don't know it, but I saved your life. 'Pears to me that you ain't been weaned long, or you wouldn't reach for an armed man." Again came the harsh, cackling laugh from the whiskey-raw female throat. Mora seemed to quiver with suppressed anger. His tongue passed along his thick, lower lip. Then he spoke. "You know who I am?" Blaze smiled and shook his head. "I am Black Mora." It was as if he had said, "I am the king." "Never heard of ya," replied Blaze. "But you sure have a hard head, partner. How's all your folks down on the farm?" Frenchie chuckled aloud. "Black Mora, eh? Mak you a quaint wit. Blaze Carlin, Black Mora." Mora was like a teased tiger, which knew that steel bars kept him from wreaking vengeance on his tormentors. In this case, the bars were Frenchie and his big pistol, which had never wavered. The pointed hammer back at full cock, like the head of a snake about to strike. Mora's face settled back to its perpetual sneer, and he turned on his heel and walked out, followed by his two men. As he went out of the door, he was followed by the woman's derisive laugh. Frenchie flipped his pistol back into its holster. Blaze turned back to the table, where men were staring at him. The man in the lookout chair spoke. "Mister, you've kind of put yourself in bad. That says Black Mora and an ad." "But he said that's who he was," smiled Blaze. "Is he supposed to be so bad?" The men around the table shifted uneasily. It was rather a personal question, as no man seemed to know who was in Mora's confidence. Blaze glanced around the circle and then laughed. "Don't nobody tell me he's a bad man, 'cause I won't believe it. He's a big black bully. Some kid will chase him off the range someday, with a tin can full of rocks hanging to his shirt tail." The dealer picked up the cards, glanced at the door uneasily, and went on, dealing. Frenchie still leaned against the bar, smiling around the room. The place grew animated again, but hilarity was forced. The king had been humiliated, disgraced, and none knew when the king might try to wipe out the stain nor how. There was a man at the poker table who did not seem of the same caliber as the rest of the crowd. He was past middle age, slow of movements, soft of voice. He played methodically, unemotional, as if thinking deeply. His hair and mustache were nearly white, and his eyes seemed to hold nothing but kindness to all men. Blaze looked up to see the blue eyes fastened upon him inquiringly. It was as if the man were asking a question. Blaze smiled at him, and for some reason half nodded, as if answering the unspoken question. After a few more hands, the blue-eyed man cashed in his chips and got up from the game. Another was waiting for his chair. He straightened his collar and sauntered toward the door. Blaze felt that his interest in the game was waning. So he also cashed in and let another take his place. The blue-eyed man was standing at the door, looking outside, and Blaze went straight to him, walking slowly. He did not speak directly to but kept his face toward the door as he said, "I kinda reckon you wants to talk to me, partner." The other shifted his feet and continued to stare at the door. "Not here. At the west end of town, a quarter of a mile away, is a house standing alone. Can you be there an hour after dark, you and your partner? Baha. Baha. Look out for Mora. I ain't a bit sleepy, partner." The man yawned and walked out of the door. Blaze turned slowly and walked up to Frenchie. "Thirsty?" he asked. "I'm Mac T. Ink we better off wit out drink, Blaze." Frenchie spoke softly. "Whiskey ver good when everybody she's happy, but nobody she act happy over de Mora business. Maybe de son of a gone she's need more convince, eh?" "I reckon you were right, Frenchie. Come on." They sauntered out of the door into the street, and once more the Eureka seemed to grow hilarious, as if a weight had been removed from its mind. Blaze told Frenchie of his conversation with the man. "He no say what?" "Bagosh, maybe she's trapped from Black Mora." Blaze shook his head. "No, I reckon not, Frenchie. I'll take that chance. Sure. Nuff. I'm bet Black Mora, Mac. Tink, we die in day, fire. He not know us. His two men see us close, but one has got busted arm, and deoda she's no set on saddle for week. I'm like dis town Blaze. Bagosh, nobody's to get rusty from live her. You bet me my life. Several cowboys whirled their horses away from a hitch rack, and one of them came bucking down the center of the street, its rider swinging sidewise in the saddle, his right spur hooked into the cinch, while he fanned the bronco's ears with his sombrero. Another forced his horse to enter the saloon, spurring the frightened beast into a jerky buck as it went inside, and a few moments later bucked out again, with a big bottle held aloft in his hand. His horse passed Blaze and Frenchy in a whirl of dust as he raced to catch the others. Across the street was a sign. Sheriff of Fice. A notice was pinned to the door. Blaze and Frenchy crossed the street and read the notice. Closed by order of Vigilant. Blaze studied the crudely lettered sign. The same man wrote both signs, this one and the one we found on that dead man, Frenchy. The letters are made just the same way. What dis one say? Asked Frenchy. Blaze read it aloud. Bagosh! Exclaimed Frenchy. I Mac T. Inked de lawyer starved to death in dis country. The hangman she's good for do to hang, but she's poor judge. I'm an tink. Crooked sheriff, I reckon, observed Blaze. The vigilantes likely found him out and made him hard to catch. They strolled from saloon to saloon, but there was no sign of Black Mora nor his two men. Frenchy watched Blaze walk past game after game without interest, and wondered what had come over his partner. Somehow the games of chance did not attract Blaze now. No one paid any attention to them, which proved that news of Black Mora's humiliation had not reached their ears. Everyone seemed intent on his own pleasures. Groups of cowpunchers drifted from saloon to saloon, singing, playing like a crowd of overgrown children. Their spurs jingling over the rough floors. Already the huge, shaded oil lamps had been lighted over the gambling tables, and their smoky odors mingled with the scent of alcohol and tobacco fumes. Dealers finished their shifts and made way for fresh, clear-eyed men. In shirt sleeves and eye shades, Blaze and Frenchy sat tilted back against the wall, watching the action of the place, but taking no part. Finally, Blaze tilted forward and got to his feet. It was time to go. He spoke to Frenchy, and they threaded their way through the crowd and into the street. They saddled their own horses, paid the small fee, and rode away. Pale moon lighted the dusty road, while a film of dust clouds seemed to hang above the road, marking the swift passing of someone a short time before. The house was easy to find, standing alone, bulking black in the dim moonlight. Not a window was lighted. Not a horse nor a vehicle was in evidence. Must be the right place, observed Blaze, swinging sidewise in his saddle. The door opened, and the blue-eyed man's voice spoke. Would you mind leaving your horses behind the house where no one could see them from the road? Sure thing, replied Blaze. And they rode to the rear. The door was open for them, and they stepped into a dark room. The door was closed behind them. A match flared up, and they watched a man light a small oil lamp. As the glow lighted up the room, they glanced around. Sitting in a semicircle were at least a dozen men. Blaze glanced at the window and saw that it was covered with several thicknesses of blankets. The lamp had likely been extinguished before opening the door. The blue-eyed man stepped beside Blaze and spoke to the men. Gentlemen, these are the two men. One of them knocked Black Mora down in the Eureka this afternoon. His partner would have killed Mora in another moment. They are strangers in Wolf Butte. A tall, rangy man got to his feet and held out his hand to Blaze. Partner, I'd admire to shake your hand. Blaze smiled and shook hands with him. Not to be outdone, Frenchy stepped forward and offered his hand. Bagosh, you shake hands wit, good man. When you shake wit, Blaze Carlin and Frenchy ditto. That seemed to break the tension. You are wondering why I asked you to come here, aren't you? Asked the blue-eyed man. Fella kinda like to know, admitted Blaze. You do the. Will ya, Judge? Asked one of the men. You say the kind of stuff to say. The blue-eyed man nodded and turned to Blaze. I am Judge Whalen. These men, indicating the semicircle of men, these men and myself compose the Vigilance Committee. Bargosh, you be ashamed, blurted Frenchy. You hang old crippled man? Judge Whalen glanced at the men and back at Frenchy. What was that, ditto? We buried a victim of the vigilantes yesterday, replied Blaze. It was an old man. Another one, said the judge sadly. Where was this done, Carlin? Blaze tried to describe the place, but was interrupted by one of the men, who got to his feet. I know the place, Judge, but I don't know the man. It's west of Morris Ranch. This man has only been there a short time. I talked with him, but he had little to say. He acted kinda queer. Their idea seems to be to kill, regardless of who their victim may be, observed the judge, but turned quickly to Blaze. I forgot that you did not know. We are the original Vigilance Committee, but we have not been active for over 2 months. Law and order seem to have been established by us, after all other means had failed. Our sheriff was unable to handle the situation, so we gave him our assistance and then disbanded. Since then, another organization has appeared, operating under our name. An organization which has undone all our good work, put us to shame, and are now terrorizing the country. Murder after murder has been done in the name of the vigilantes. Our sheriff has disappeared, perhaps killed, and his office door bears a warning from the vigilantes. No man knows where they will strike next. The cripple you found hanging to the tree is only one of the many they have murdered. No doubt you are aware that the law and order crowd are greatly in the minority. We were a power for a while, but that power is gone, it seems. Our investigations are useless as no man seems to want to tell what he knows for. Fear of vengeance. The bank has closed its door after a raid by the same gang, in which the cashier, one of our organization, was killed. Stores have been looted. Things have come to such a state that a decent woman does not dare be seen on the street of Wolf Butte. You have seen the reckless riding, shooting, profanity, the flaunting of morals. Each day it grows worse. She sure is a stem wonder, Judge, admitted Blaze. What do you want us to do? You knocked Black Mora down today. It is the first time that any man has raised his hand against Mora and lived. He is the swiftest, most deadly pistol shot in the country, a man without a shred of conscience. The men who work for him are the pick of the outlaws. There is no question but what he has spies everywhere. 5 of our organization have been killed. You will ask why we do not remove Black Mora? He has a larger organization than we have. He knows our every move. Practically every man in our crowd is married. I am not ashamed to admit to you that we are afraid. Honest men cannot be on their guard every moment. No man will accept the sheriff's office. It is suicide. We want a man who is unafraid and who is willing to put his soul, his life into it. Judge Whalen's voice was softly pitched, impassioned as if pleading before a jury of 12 instead of telling plain facts to 2 men. The shadows of the cattlemen bulked grotesquely on the wall as they humped forward, listening intently to the one man among them who could tell calmly of their wrongs. Blaze got to his feet and adjusted his belt. The flickering light accentuated the bronze highlights of his Indian-like features and seemed to intensify the white strip of hair. Can you make a sheriff without an election? He asked. By appointment, nodded the judge. We have with us the commissioners of this county, who may, in the event of no incumbent, appoint a sheriff to serve the remainder of the unexpired term. Sheriff wouldn't have a chance in the world, objected a grizzled cowman. That's why nobody wants the job. I wish you'd appoint Frenchy ditto for sheriff, said Blaze. Frenchy make a danged good sheriff. Bar gosh, I'm vote for Blaze Carlin, declared Frenchy. Why not you? Asked the judge. Blaze shook his head. Judge, you need brains in that office. Frenchy has more sabre than I have. If you can make him sheriff, I'll be his deputy. It wouldn't be quite legal, stated the judge. Neither of you are voters here. Just came into the state, admitted Blaze. Another of the group got to his feet. Judge, I says to, with legality. We reconsiderin', right and wrong not law. I don't know how these two men aims to be of a bit of use to us as a sheriff and deputy, but I'm willin' to help appoint him. Have you any ideas of what you are confronting? Asked the judge. Blaze laughed. I've been a gambler most of my life, Judge. I ain't never cared much for law and order until I helped cut down an old man who had been hung. He was a cripple in one knee, and his old hands was twisted from disease. He could neither run nor shoot. I don't reckon I'd ever feel good if I did do something to pay back the men who done that. They devil do that job, added Frenchy. I'm not afraid from any men at hang all men. By maybe, I'm man. I'm T Inc. And I'm no lack to stand on wind and look up the rope, bagosh. Hirin' Frenchy for sheriff likely won't be legal, stated Blaze, but neither is hangin' legal when you do it promiscuous like. It ain't because we want to be sheriff, gents. Me and Frenchy are just two ordinary men, and we ain't able to do no more than any two ordinary men. But bein' sheriff and deputy kinda gives us something to work on. We only asks one favor of ya, and that is to let us handle it in our own way. You can never do anything by arguing with them gents. If we takes this job, there won't be no questions asked nor answered. The judge turned to the group. Men, I will write out the appointment at once, if you all agree. I think it will be a good night's work for the country. Should be bad luck for somebody, grinned Frenchy enthusiastically. Frenchy ditto, sheriff, eh? I'm get scare of myself, Blaze. Ho, 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 ho. Wolf Butte get frayed for scare when she see the sheriff. Bimeby I'm hired a cow punch to ride. Heard on the outlaw, because I'm a to jail too small. Ho, ho, ho. The men grouped around the table, while Judge Whalen penciled the appointment and had it signed. He handed it to Frenchy. This is your authority, Mr. Ditto. Mr. Ditto. Frenchy repeated the title as he grinned down at the document, which he could not read, and then put it in his pocket. Bar gosh, Frenchy Ditto. Got regular job now. I am T Inc. de Wolf, and Grizzly move in close, because there be plenty feed bimeby. Ho, ho, ho. Please do not underrate Black Mora, said the judge seriously. Bully he may be, but I do not think he is a coward. He has a heart as black as his face, and he wields a dangerous power. I know you do not fear him, but I ask you to respect his ability. Anybody else need watching? Asked Blaze. Everybody. The judge's gesture even encompassed present company. Wolf Butte has become the hangout of every outlaw from Wyoming to Canada. This railroad will bring in the scum of the earth, and Wolf Butte will be their headquarters. Unless conditions change, this town will be a red hell, and we'll pay for the pitch. Bagosh, I'm lack this town, grinned Frenchy. T. Inc. I. Stay here and grow up with her. Blaze and Frenchy shook hands with the men. The lamp was extinguished, and they all filed outside. The moon was hidden by clouds. We want to wish you the best of luck, said the judge softly. I reckon we'll need considerable, smiled Blaze. It looks kinda stormy. Our horses are over in the coulee, explained one of the men, and without further conversation, they filed away in the dark, while Frenchy and Blaze rode back to the blazing lights of Wolf Butte, where they stabled their horses and went straight to the sheriff's office. The door was unlocked. Inside they found 2 small cots and several blankets. Blaze barred the door, and they went to bed. The street echoed with galloping hoofs, the shouts of drunken men and women. From the dance halls came the raucous notes of an orchestra as Wolf Butte danced. Blaze stared up at the dark ceiling of the office and wondered why he did not want to join the revelry. Wondered why the green cloth had no attraction for him now. From Frenchy's cot came a stentorian snore. The new sheriff was doing no unnecessary worrying over the morrow. Blaze grinned and stretched his full length. Men had shaken his hand and expressed confidence in him. Honest men. He was no longer Blaze Carlin, gambler. He was Blaze Carlin, the right arm of the law. He flexed his supple fingers and wondered how long the arm of the law would last. At least it would start reaching. Wolf Butte was a different place in the light of the morning sun. Few men were on the street. Swampers sluiced out the saloons and gambling houses, sweeping out stacks of torn and stained playing cards, cleaning up for the day and night to come. Freighters' wagons, with red-eyed, cursing drivers, creaked away from the stores, headed back to the source of supplies. Men were packing a bunch of horses in front of a store. A hatless, disheveled person staggered out of a saloon and started across the... He stopped and looked up at the sky, as if amazed that it should be morning. Perhaps he was ashamed to be seen in the full light of day, for he staggered back from whence he came. There was no breeze, and the passing of hoof and wheel left a film of alkali dust in the air, a film through which the heat waves began to dance a devil's jig. Wolf Butte awoke slowly, painfully. It was useless to try to sleep in that heat. Men began to drift from the overcrowded hotels to the saloons. Men rolled out of their blankets at the feed corrals. The loft of the livery stable furnished lodging for those unable to secure a bed. The bare ground furnished lodging for those who were unable to secure rooms, or were physically unable to reach loft, hotel, or feed corral. Dry of throat, bloodshot of eye, and silent of voice, they headed for the oases of the town where, after a few crooks of the elbow, they would revive in spirit. Breakfast might or might not be forgotten. It was all according to the degree of thirst and the amount of liquid refreshments taken aboard before the pangs of hunger had a chance to manifest itself. Blaze and Frenchy were the first ones at breakfast. A frowsy waiter, with one side of his face purpled from temple to nostril and a smear of blood on his collar, took their order. He mumbled something about a big time last night, but Blaze and Frenchy gave him no heed. Two men came in and sat down near them. One of them was explaining that his partner had been too drunk to see. I tell you that Chuck Sales would nailed Mex free just like that. The speaker snapped his fingers. Just like that, but he seen that Mex had a busted arm. Chuck and Mex had an argument to settle. Seems that Mex comes in to have Doc Brenton fix up his arm, but Doc's as full of morphine and ain't worth a to fix nothing. Mex would get Sales if he was hurt, argued the other. I did like to know who got Mex. Musto. Been an accident, 'cause Mex is fast as a rattlesnake. He ain't Mora's right-hand man for nothing. Somebody told Chuck that Mora's ranch house burned down, and of course Chuck had to make a fool remark about the vigilantes. I sure looked for some of Mora's gang to get Chuck. Chuck's is always talking funny. What? Chuck got against Mora? Asked the other. Jealous, I reckon. Chuck Sales don't want nobody he can't boss, and Mora won't have nobody he can't boss. So it's say, him and Mora deed make a good fight. Chuck would whip him. The man spoke with conviction, but the other laughed scornfully. Whip him? Mora's big enough to tie Chuck in a hard knot. If Mora ever got his hands on Chuck, he'd just squash him complete. Big enough, agreed the other. But size ain't everything, Judd. Just between me and you, I think Mora's shy on guts. The one called Judd laughed. Don't you think it, Ben? Mora's got the guts of a grizzly, so he has. In size, grinned Judd. Only in size. The back of his head's as flat as that, their wall. I ain't never seen a flat head yet what ain't lacked that something, which makes men fight to the last ditch. Shh. That shh, cautioned Ben. You don't need to yell it. The two men attacked their meal. More men drifted in, growling over their meals like hungry animals. Many of them bore marks of drunken conflict. Then came a tall man, stumbling in, his arm tied in a dirty sling. He pushed a man aside and sat down heavily. Blaze and Frenchy glanced at each other, and then at this newcomer. It was Mex Free, the man whom Blaze had shot in the arm near Morris Ranch. He glowered around the room, his left hand, rattling his knife on the table edge nervously. Suddenly, he looked straight at Blaze and Frenchy. His face seemed to set in deep lines. His eyes almost disappeared under this frowning brows. He licked his lips, and his hand, still holding the knife, brushed across his brow as he tried to fathom the mystery. Blaze nudged Frenchy with his knee and whispered without moving his lips, "We were burned in that fire." Free turned away, staring around the room, but his glance strayed back to Blaze and Frenchy, and without a backward glance he got to his feet and stumbled out through the door. No one paid any attention to his going, except Blaze and Frenchy. "I make Ink you right," grinned Frenchy. "She sees, goes, bagosh." They left the restaurant and went back to the office. Blaze tore the sign off the door and made another, which read, "Open for Buisons," and signed it Frenchy Detior, Sheriff. A man stopped and watched Blaze tack the sign on the door. Being unable to read, and not being ashamed to acknowledge it, he asked Blaze to read it aloud to him. The man made no comment, but turned and went across the street into a saloon. A few minutes later, a curious crowd came over to prove the rumor that Wolf Butte had a new sheriff. It seemed to amuse them, but they withheld their laughter until they went back to the saloon, where they became hilarious. Blaze and Frenchy listened to their mirth, but failed to be infected with the humor of the situation. Blaze suggested that they replenish their supply of ammunition, and they went up to the general store, where the storekeeper welcomed them with a smile. "I met you last night," he informed them in a whisper. "Name's McQuirk, Jim McQuirk." "You was with the judge?" asked Blaze, and McQuirk nodded. He furnished them with the required ammunition and refused to accept pay. "It's the least I can do," he stated. From under the counter he produced a Winchester repeating rifle, 44-40, which he handed to Blaze, along with several boxes of ammunition. "Take this and try it out. I don't know how she shoots. It was sent to me from Helena, and I ain't to never shot it. She's faster than the sharp." Blaze grinned. "I say be that gun, pardner. Fella down on the North Fork of the Cheyenne had one, and I used it on antelope. I'm sure obliged to you." "You real welcome, Carlin." Other men came in, but paid no attention to Blaze and Frenchy, who went out and back to their office. Crowd was congregated in front of the Square Deal saloon, and several of them laughed aloud as they watched Blaze and Frenchy go down the street. "What's our first move?" asked Blaze, after they reached the office. Frenchy examined the new gun, testing the action, peering through the sights. Finally, he laid it down and began filling the empty loops on his belt. "Blaze, de notice in delivery stable she's to be continue." "Make em give up their guns?" wondered Blaze. "Sure thing. Means that we've got to make good a whoopin'. Just like de sign say," nodded Frenchy. "I'm be de sheriff or not, and say dat no man she's can pack de gun in town. Whiskey, card, female no mix good wit de gun. I'm no, can stop de whiskey, card, female. But I'm stop de gun bagosh. I'm go by de stable. You mac Frenchy ditto on de sign, eh? I'm tack de new gun, Blaze. De sharps is good gun. But I need more fast shoot, maybe." They went back to the stable, and Blaze signed the new sheriff's name to the order. "Was this order ever enforced?" asked Blaze. "No, it sure was teat." The stableman seemed greatly amused at the question. "You can do a thing like that, pardner. Wolf Butte won't stand for nothing like that, and you can cinch your hull to that statement." 3 men rode into the wide doors of the stable and got off their horses. They were a hard-looking trio, grimy from a long ride. They turned their horses in stalls and started for the door when Frenchy called to them. "Tack, look," said Frenchy, pointing at the sign. They stopped and glanced at the sign. One of them laughed and swung on his heel. "Come on, boys. That don't mean nothing." "She's mean what she say?" snapped Frenchy. "I'm the sheriff, and you leave your gun with me." The man looked at Frenchy as if astonished. He looked at the sign again and laughed sneeringly. "You the sheriff? You? Leave the gun with me." Frenchie's voice was softly pitched, as if asking a favor. His left hand swung out, as if to receive the gun, his fingers working nervously. It was as if he was crumbling something in the palm of his hand. "Leave my gun? With you?" The man's words were widely spaced as he stared at Frenchie's left hand. Astonishment seemed to grip him, but indignation flashed across his eyes and his hand streaked for his gun. He was a fraction of a second too late. Frenchie fired from his hip, and at the crack of the gun, Blaze covered the other two. The man's hand relaxed from his gun, which thudded to the soggy floor. Over his face came an astonished expression. He knitted his brows, as if deep in thought, and then sank to his knees, after which he slid softly on his face. "Dagon, stay with me," declared Frenchie without emotion, reaching down and picking it up from the floor. He turned to the astonished men and removed the guns from their holsters. Then he pointed down at the man on the floor. "You packed a man down to the sheriff office. If you think the doctor do him any good, you call him. Stay here to collect the gun." Without a word, the two men picked up their companion and carried him out of the stable, followed by Blaze, who directed them. Men saw them going down the street and followed to the office, where they clustered around the door. No questions were asked, and no information given. A man came up to Blaze and touched him on the arm. He was collarless and unshaven, wearing a hat which was minus the crown, but there was a certain refinement about his face that hinted of better things. "Have them take him to my place," said the man hoarsely. "They know where. I am Doc Brenton." Blaze spoke to the men, and they turned and followed the doctor down the street. "I wonder what in happened to Jim Clell," said one of the crowd. Blaze turned and looked at the speaker. "He refused to obey orders," said Blaze. A man laughed. "Somebody given orders to Jim Clell?" "The sheriff," said Blaze. "It was an even break," stated the voice of the stableman who had followed them. "Jim reached for his gun first. I never seen nothing like it. Jim was hit before he could grip his gun. I've seen guns come out fast, gents, but nothing like this new sheriff and his deputy drawed him. They could yell, draw, spit on their hands, and still beat Jim Clell." The stableman's exaggeration was accepted for what it was worth, but Wolf Butte knew that Jim Clell was as good as their best with a gun. "I don't say be this sheriff proposition," said one of the men. "My partner was appointed last night," explained Blaze. "Wolf Butte is through running hog wild. You can pass the word that law and order is coming back to this country, and she's coming so fast that some of these snake hunters had better hunt a hole or get run over." "Vigilantes failed, did they?" grinned a man. Blaze ignored the question and went inside. The crowd split up, muttering their individual opinions, which were not at all favorable to such proceedings. Frenchie had started the ball to rolling in the right way. Luckily, he had downed one of the well-known outlaws instead of one of the rank and file. This might make others hesitate to cross him. Blaze knew that Wolf Butte was shocked. Of course, there was a danger of having the whole lawless element against them. But, again, there was a chance the different factions might split in their opinions. There were at least 3 different gangs who were openly hostile to each other: Moras, Sales, and McKeever's. Black Mora had the greatest following, but there was something about Chuck Sales' crowd which savored of cold efficiency. There was bad blood between Sales and Mora, which is the usual thing between outlaw leaders, both of whom desired supremacy. McKeever had a small following, but was known personally as a hard man to handle. He seemed content to let Sales and Mora fight it out. Respect for the law is born in all men. There is a psychological something that gives a peace officer a slight edge over the criminal. Perhaps it is psychology of knowing that right will win. The outlaw, regardless of his ability, hides from the law, knowing that sooner or later he will pay the penalty. For down in his heart, he fears the law, and when fear grips him, he is no match for the man who is backed by the right. Blaze knew this. He knew nothing of psychology, but he knew that he owned this slight edge over the outlaw. The shooting of Jim Clell had affected him no more than if Frenchie had shot at a target. He did not know Jim Clell. He wondered what would have happened had he and Frenchie ridden into Wolf Butte and someone had demanded their guns. Perhaps they would have done as Jim Clell did. "She's all in the point of view," said Blaze aloud. "Which is whatever," admitted a voice at the door. Blaze swung around. The man was hardly past 30, broad of shoulders and deep of chest. His hair and mustache were bleached to a light straw color, and his eyes were pale blue. His face was burned to a brick red, and his nose had been broken at some distant time, which left the high bridge of the organ in such a position that it appeared to be falling over into one of the eye sockets. One of his cheeks was filled with tobacco, the cheek on the same side as the falling nose, which gave him a peculiar lopsided expression. "Howdy," nodded Blaze. "I forgot I spoke out loud." The man came inside and looked around. "You the sheriff?" "No, I'm the undersheriff," said Blaze. "Name's Blaze Carlin." The man stuck out his hand. "I'm Chuck Sales. I kinda want to get this sheriff business straight, Carlin." Blaze shook hands with him. "I heard 2 men talking about you this morning, Sales. You don't like Black Mora, it seems." Sales stared at Blaze. "Do you like him?" "I can live without him," smiled Blaze. "I hear you can," nodded Sales. "Dad Henderson tells me that you hit Mora in the ear with a beer glass and knocked him down." Why, I wish I could I seen that. Seems like I never happen to be around when anything pleasant is being done." Sales seemed greatly disappointed. He walked back to the door and spat out into the street. "Somebody told me that you nailed Jim Clell today. What's the idea?" There was nothing offensive about Sales' question, only mild interest. "Wolf Butte needs law and order," said Blaze. "And we're going to supply it, Sales." Sales nodded and scratched his crooked nose. "I dunno, but you were right. Wolf Butte is kinda ornery. I don't like it myself, Carlin. It brings so many crooks here that a honest outlaw don't have no chance to make a living." Blaze laughed, but Sales did not lose his serious expression. "It's a fact," insisted Sales. "I don't like this idea of around in the town. I've lost 2 good men lately. It's got so's I've got to watch behind and in front or get leaded. Yes, sir. It's got so a fella has to gunfight somebody all the time to have anybody respect him. I'm a horse thief, Carlin. This band is spoiling my boys, don't you know it? I can't get them sober long enough to even steal a jackass." Blaze laughed joyously. Here's something different in Outlaw's an outlaw who was unafraid to acknowledge his profession to the law. An outlaw with a well-developed idea of humor. Sales, in spite of his crooked face, had a strong personality, and Blaze wanted to know him better. "You sure comes to a strange place to make your complaints," grinned Blaze. "No use going to a saloon or grocery store, is there?" "No, drawled Blaze. "But you see, we've kinda made up our minds to chase every outlaw out of the country." "Zasso." Sales shifted his tobacco and squinted at Blaze. "Well, I'm betting that you will make one of a stagger at it, Carlin. You look to me like the kind of a whippoorwill what will do something, except talk. I reckon. You classes me with the rest of 'em, which is right and proper, but I ain't going to run till I has to. Willin' to tell you that neither me nor none of my men will ever shoot you in the back. Maybe we'll give you a run, face to face maybe not. I know the order you've put out, but I'm asking you to let me keep my gun, 'cause you might need it." Blaze smiled into Sales' crooked face and nodded. "I reckon you can hang on to your gun for a while." "Much obliged," nodded Sales seriously, and walked out. Blaze did not understand what Sales had meant when he said that Blaze would, or might, have need of his Sales' gun. Blaze had no desire to take Sales' gun. In spite of the fact that Sales was notorious, Sales did not look act nor talk like a fighter. Yet the man in the restaurant had rated him above Black Mora. Blaze leaned against the doorway, watching the street. Wolf Butte was beginning to warm up to the afternoon round of pleasure. A fistfight was in progress farther up the street, and the closely packed audience were cheering and jostling for a closer view. The creaking of a wagon caused Blaze to turn his head. Coming up the street was a mismated team of mules, hitched to a wagon, on the seat of which sat a woman and a little girl. The woman's face was hidden by a sunbonnet, but Blaze could see that the girl was a pretty, tangle-haired thing, frail as a flower. The woman drove the team to the front of a store, where she tied the mules and went into the store. As she started into the door, two men came out. They looked closely at her, and one of them went back and peered inside. He spoke to his companion, and they both laughed as they went back inside. Blaze wondered why they had watched her. He knew that she had not spoken to either of them as she passed. Blaze shut the office door and walked to the store. The woman was leaning on a counter, talking to the proprietor. The two men were standing near her, looking down at the child, which was clinging to her skirts. Blaze heard enough to know that the woman was crying. The two men looked closely at Blaze, but he gave them only a glance. The proprietor glanced past her, his eyes filled with pity. Then he put his hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Mrs. Wheeler, go over to my house, will ya? My old woman will be mighty glad to see ya, and you are welcome to stay as long as ya like, you and the little girl." The woman made some reply and turned around. She did not look at Blaze, but he could see that she was both young and pretty. But her face was grey from suffering. "Just tie the team to the gate," called the storekeeper. "I'll see that they are taken care of." The woman nodded and went on. The two men lounged out behind her and stood in front of the building until she drove away. The storekeeper shook his head wearily and turned to Blaze. "Carlin, my name's Delaney. I was out there last night with the judge." Blaze held out his hand. "Glad to meet you. What's the matter with the woman if it's any of my business?" "God knows it is, Carlin. That's Mrs. Carlin, Wheeler Jack Wheeler's wife. Lives down on Cactus Creek, where they was getting a good start. Honest. Was Jack Wheeler, and he was one of our organization. Quiet, sober, minded his own business. He wait a minute." Delaney turned away to sell a man some tobacco, but came back to Blaze when the man had gone. "Last night or this morning, the vigilantes took Wheeler out of his home, Carlin. There ain't a tree within 3 miles of there. Know what they done? They tied his grindstone around his neck, like you did rope a stone to a pup's neck, and drowned him in a deep pool. On man was guarding Mrs. Wheeler and the kid, but he got interested in the murder, and she and the kid got away. They hid in some weeds, and heard the guard get cussed for letting them get away. The gang hunted until daylight, but gave it up and went away. As soon as she was able, she hitched the mules and drove here." "Reckon they wanted her?" queried Blaze. Delaney nodded slowly. "I reckon so, Carlin. Women her kind ain't plentiful." "Down like a pup," muttered Blaze slowly. "Delaney, I don't reckon that is fit for the man who would do a thing like that. Don't you think the devil's got a little honor left? Where does the soul of a man like that go to, anyway?" Delaney shook his head. "I dunno. Maybe they'll come back to Wolf Butte. It's beginning to." Came the dull snap of a pistol shot. Blaze rushed to the door with Delaney right behind him. Scattered bunch of horsemen threw up a dust cloud in the middle of the street, which prevented Blaze from seeing just what was going on beyond them. Out of the dust cloud came a man, running, looking back and swinging a pistol in his hand. Suddenly the running man jerked sidewise, stumbled and fell sprawling, while from beyond him came the crack of a rifle. The horseman drew aside. Down the street came Frenchy, running carefully, the Winchester held in both hands. Straight to the fallen man he went. He picked up the man's pistol, shoved it inside his belt, and came straight toward Blaze and Delaney, ignoring the man he had shot. ran into the street and picked up the disabled outlaw, taking him into one of the saloons. Frenchie had a smear of blood across his cheek, and blood was running from the back of his right hand. "Day son of a gun, she's fool me," he panted. "She's have another gun inside the vest. Bah gosh, I'm get that gun, just the same. This new gun be the good one, Blaze." Frenchie trotted back to the stable, while curious eyes followed him. He had hit a running man running through a dust cloud, at 150 yards, and with one shot. There was something sinister about a man who could shoot like that, and then ignore his victim, except to collect his pistol. It savored of an Indian killing for a scalp. Wolf Butte had become serious regarding the new sheriff. Delaney had been watching the men carry the fallen outlaw away, and now he turned to Blaze. "Carlin, I haven't a bloodthirsty spot in my soul, but I could do a scalp dance right now." That was Buck Law, Bill McKeever's partner. Buck is part Shoshonen. McKeever is one of the worst killers in the territory, and he'll sure be dancing Ditto's hair when he hears of this. Blaze smiled. "Frenchie's hair is on kinda tight, Delaney. He's got the biggest heart in the world, Frenchie has. If you told him about the Wheeler family, he'd be bawling like a calf. Can't stand suffering. Somehow not when it's women and kids, but he does love a fight. If you ever see him go into action, watch him close. He's fast with a gun, fast as a streak, but it's the speed of a fox. Did you ever see one of them magic fellas sleight of hand? Yeah, did. They ain't so fast, Delaney, but they makes you look at something else while they does the trick. Frenchie is always doing something, just ahead of his draw. I saw him do it when he shot Jim Clell. He said to Clell, 'You leave your gun with me,' just like that, and all the time he had his left hand half closed, shuffling his fingers like he was going to crumble up something and throw it at Clell. Clell kinda talked like a man in his sleep, trying to watch that hand and Frenchie's other hand too. Clell went for his gun, but it was too late. His motion was made like he had just happened to remember it, and Frenchie beat him a mile. "They tell me that you sabed the 6-gun yourself," observed Delaney. Blaze smiled and shook his head. "Not too well. I need an even break, Delaney. I hate to shoot a man. It always seems to me that it ain't right to cut a man off. When a fella fights his way up to my age, suffering things and enjoying things, and just living along it, don't seem right for a man to cut him short with a pinch of powder and a pellet of lead. I wonder if anybody deserves it." Blaze shook his head and continued. "I reckon it's got to be done though, and I also reckon that fate wrote in the big book that me and Frenchie Ditto was to come here and make a cleanup. I hope the big book has more pages about us after this chore is done." "I sure hope so," nodded Delaney. "I sure do, Carlin. I reckon I'll get some of the boys to go down there and help me bury Jack Wheeler. His wife dragged him out of the creek and put him in the house. My Blaze, I reckon some men deserve worse than a pellet of lead, and I won't feel sorry if I have to pull the trigger." Blaze turned and walked back to the office. As he walked up to the door, a bullet whistled past his face and thudded into the casing. From across the street came the muffled thump of a pistol shot. One of the 3 front windows of the Eureka's second story was open, but the cheap print curtains were drawn together. Blaze whirled on his heel and went straight toward the saloon, walking swiftly. He was deadly cool, ignoring the chance of another shot. This was no time to back down, no time for anything except swift action. Blaze had not reached the door when another pistol shot seemed to jar the building, but no bullet came his way. He walked inside. Men looked at him, but it was evident that none of them in the big room connected his coming in any way with the pistol shots. The room was in an uproar, as 2 men quarreled over a misplaced bet on a roulette combination. And it is doubtful if anyone in the room had heard the 2 shots fired upstairs. Blaze walked straight for the stairway, which led to a balcony. The second story of the Eureka was not divided off by a ceiling from the lower floor, but was a rectangle of rooms leading on to a balcony. Blaze trotted up the stairs and had just turned toward the front rooms when a man stepped out of a door onto the balcony. Blaze stopped, and his hand dropped to his gun. The man turned his head and slowly closed the door, then turned to face Blaze. It was Chuck Sales. Had Sales fired the bullet which almost hit him? Blaze touched the butt of his pistol, ready to draw, but Sales made no move toward his gun. He glanced over the balcony rail, looking over the crowd. He lifted his head and smiled at Blaze. In spite of himself, Blaze smiled in return. There was something contagious about that humorous smile, the lopsided nose and the face overbalanced with the enormous chew of tobacco. Sales sauntered slowly up to Blaze, turned sidewise, and lifted his right elbow, disclosing a heavy Colt gun, which was shoved between his belt and body. Blaze lifted it out and glanced at it. One shot had been fired. "He made a mistake," said Sales softly. "Good shot he was, but he had to shoot left-handed. Never shoot a snake to cripple it, Carlin, 'cause you must. Remember that you've got to kill it to ruin its fangs." Sales walked slowly around to the stairs and went down into the crowd. Blaze shoved the gun into the waistband of his pants and watched Sales go to the roulette layout and buy chips. Blaze knew that there was no use going to that room. Sales had killed Mex Free. There was no question of that. Free had hid up there and tried to kill Blaze, shooting with his left hand. Blaze remembered what Sales had said about the need Blaze would have of Sales' gun. A couple of dance hall girls came out of a room next to the one Sales had been in. They stopped at the door and looked at Blaze, as if afraid, but Blaze smiled at them and they walked past him. To Blaze, a woman was a woman, no matter what else she was, and he lifted his hat and bowed as they went past. One of them giggled foolishly, but the other stared at him for a moment, turned her painted face away, as if embarrassed, and went down the stairs. She was not a young woman, but there were traces of former beauty in her face, in spite of the glaring rouge and the penciled lines. Blaze remembered her. She was the woman who laughed when he hit Black Mora with the beer mug. He went back down the stairs and out through the crowd. Frenchie was walking toward the office, carrying his rifle in the crook of his arm, and Blaze crossed to meet him at the door. "Somebody she's tried to make fool from me," grinned Frenchie. "Nobody come to the stable now." Somebody's tell about me, Frenchie ditto." "Ho, ho, ho, ho! One fella she's get mad for me, Blaze, and she's talk bad. I'm tie her up, and teach her the soft language. Frenchie ditto she's head-educate, bagosh." Blaze told him of Free's attempt to kill him, and Frenchie listened open-mouthed to Blaze's tale of Chuck Sale assistance. "I'm hear from him," nodded Frenchie. "Day stableman she's talk about Sales. Int this Sales be son of a gon for fight." Blaze told him of the Wheeler family, and at the finish of the tale, Frenchie's whiskers quivered with anger. "Day little kid, Blaze. His papa drown wit grandstone. The man what do dis must be fined. Furs de cripple old man killed. Den de Hons papa. Frenchie ditto she's on warpath. Bagosh!" A group of horsemen rode past the office and swung over to the hitch rack near the Square Deal saloon. Riding in the lead was Black Mora, his ape-like, shoulders hunched, looking neither to the right nor left. They tied their horses and clattered into the saloon. Blaze stood in the doorway watching them go in. Several men came out of the Eureka, among them being Chuck Sales. One of the men spoke to Sales, who nodded and started for the Square Deal. Blaze turned to Frenchie. Black Mora and his men just went into the Square Deal. Frenchie. "Chuck Sales is headed for there too." "Bah gosh," chuckled Frenchie. "I'm make. Tink de grizzly get fed quick now. We go there, Blaze." They crossed the street and went in behind Sales. The men who had been with Sales went in behind them. Black Mora was leaning on the bar, a glass of liquor in his hand, listening to a man who was telling what Mrs. Wheeler had told Delaney. It was one of the two men who had followed her into the store. The man was finishing his story and imparted the information that Delaney was going to take care of the woman and little girl. Black Mora shrugged his shoulders. "Why do you tell me these things?" he asked sourly, and threw the glass of strong liquor full in the man's face. The man staggered back, his arm across his face, as if warding off a blow. Women and kids don't interest me none, growled Mora. What do I care about? Mora turned his head and looked full at Sales. The crowd drew away, expecting serious trouble. This was the first time that Sales and Mora had faced each other, and everyone knew that there would be blood spilt when they met. Sales was smaller than Mora, yet Sales was by no manner of means a small man compared with the other men in the saloon. Mora's face was half smiling insolently as he looked at Sales, but Sales' crooked face did not lose its indifferent expression. Then Sales spat deliberately on Mora's boots. It was an unforgivable insult, yet Mora did not move. The smile faded from his lips, and his eyes drew down to mere slits. Mora knew that Sales was a killer, knew that to reach for a gun would be suicide. His eyes shifted down for a fraction of a second. Sales was smiling now, his tobacco-satined teeth showing through his up-curled lips. I killed Mex Free, your best man, said Sales softly, ominously. He kicked like a chicken with its head cut off. Still Mora did not move. His eyes shifted for an instant, as if seeking a chance to get out of this encounter. Then Sales laughed. Viv. Got ya, Mora. I could kill you before you could move. My men are behind your men, Mora, and they can't help you none. You need help, Black Mora. Want to run the country, eh? You big bully. You are scared of death right now, but I'm not going to kill you yet. You were bigger than I am, Mora, but I am the better man. Take off your gun and fight like a man. You lousy, mud-colored coyote. It was unthinkable. Black Mora swayed away from the bar, licking his lips. His face broke into a wolfish grin. Mora had fought with his hands, and knew something of his own strength. Knew that he could crush an ordinary man, as a grizzly crushes a sheep. A buzz of wonderment from the crowd. Was Sales crazy? Frenchie stepped in front of Mora and held out his left hand. I'm take the gun, he announced. I'm collect now. Mora's hand had dropped to his belt buckles, but now he stopped and stared at Frenchie's face, then at the hand before him, which was opening and shutting nervously, hesitated. Would he give up his gun to the sheriff? His hand jerked nervously away from his belt buckle as he looked at Frenchie's hand. Others watched the hand, but Blaze watched Frenchie's right hand, which had gripped the butt of his pistol, ready for a draw. Then Mora shook his head. All right, I don't care who takes it. He handed Frenchie the belt and gun, little thinking how close he had come to missing his fight with Sales. Blaze stepped forward and faced the crowd. Gents, this is going to be a fair fight. When a man goes down, the other stays off and gives him a chance to come back. They fight only on their feet. Understand? Sales, stripping off his shirts, flashed Blaze a look of gratitude. It gave him a chance against this ape-man. Men threw chairs and tables aside, clearing a large space. Word of the battle traveled fast, and in a few moments there was a steady stream of men trying to claw their way inside to see the fight. A man offered big odds on Mora, but there were no takers. Nobody considered that Sales had a chance. He can't reach Mora's head, yelled a voice. Put Chuck on a chair, yelled another. We want to see what he looks like. The men stripped quickly. Mora was even more ape-like, stripped. His body was corded with muscles, and his skin was a deep bronze. Sales was broad of shoulder, narrow of waist and hip, and his muscles were small compared with those of his antagonist. But Blaze noticed that Sales' muscles were long and supple, while Mora had corded. There was no time lost in preliminaries. Mora was ready first, moving to the center of the cleared space. His head was hunched forward on his short neck, his big hands opening and shutting as he waited for a chance to wipe out the insult. Sized Mora up, and then shot a glance around the room. Come on, growled Mora, like a hungry bear. Sales laughed and stepped forward, slightly crouched, both arms swinging easily, hands half open. His long muscles rippled easily with the swing of his arms. Mora stepped to meet him and quick as a flash Sales slapped him across the mouth with his open hand. The blow had been cat-like in its speed, and it cut Mora's lips. Before Mora could recover, Sales slapped him across the bare chest. It was as if Sales was playing tag with him. Mora cursed and launched a mighty blow at Sales, but it passed over Sales' head, cleverly ducked. Men crowded closer, muttering. This was not according to their calculations, but there was no cheering. The two men were circling each other now. Blaze noticed that Sales kept a perfect balance, while Mora seemed more clumsy, top-heavy. Mora swung again, a wide, sweeping smash. Sales blocked it with the point of his elbow, catching Morris's swinging arm between elbow and wrist. It seemed to take all the power from Mora's arm for a moment, and Sales shot a straight right to his mouth. Mora retreated slowly, his face contorted with rage. Then he sprang forward like a tiger, seeking to circle Sales with his long arms. Instead of evading them, Sales lunged forward to meet the attack. Sales' right hand flashed forward and upward, with the weight of his body behind it, and buried itself at the point of Mora's breastbone. The circling arms slithered weakly off his shoulders, as Mora locked forward from the waist, staggering blindly. By superhuman effort he kept his feet, but his swaying. There's a green mask of agony, his mouth stretched wide for air. Sales moved swiftly, uppercutting with both hands to Mora's face. Measuring his distance, keeping pace with the backward-moving Mora, he smashed in short-arm uppercuts, with the regularity of a machine. Uppercuts which did not paralyze, but cut and bruised. Sales was marking Mora for life. He drove Mora through the crowd until he backed him against the wall. Then Sales set himself for the final punch, while Mora, sobbing, slobbering, tried to cover his face with helpless arms. But the final blow was never struck. As Sales swung forward, a heavy bottle whizzed across the room and crashed against his head. Sales dropped like a log, and over him fell Mora, blubbering for mercy. For a moment there was silence, then the crash of a pistol shot. One of the men who had been standing on the bar went backward, clawing for support. He had thrown the bottle and someone in the crowd had seen the deed. Came the crash of breaking glassware, as he plunged behind the bar, and the tense crowd went hog-wild. Salesmen were out for blood, and Mora's men were willing to accommodate them. But the pistol was of little use in that close-packed place. Men drew their guns and swung them over-handed, clubbing the barrels against anything which might come before them. Bottles flew crashing against the walls, sometimes against heads. The wide doors were not wide enough to accommodate the stampede, so windows were smashed to make exits. Blaze had flung himself across Sales, shielding him from the trampling feet, while Mora's men strove to fight their way to Mora's side. Blaze managed to get to his feet, holding Sales' limp body, but was buffeted aside by weight of numbers. He clung to the inert body with one hand, while he clubbed his way through the crowd with his heavy six-shooter. Above the roar of the tumult came Frenchie's voice. "Hold on, you fools! Hold on!" Der sheriff say stop, but that crowd knew no authority. Blaze fought his way to the front door, while Mora's men managed to get their leader and half drag him out the back door. Bullets began to fly as soon as the clans were separated sufficiently to tell which was which. Mora's men got him out of the door, but they had paid toll. 3 of his men did not get to the door, and as many more were stretched on the floor, downed by pistol barrels or thrown bottles. 4 other men, whether salesmen or otherwise, were also hors de combat. The shooting stopped when Mora's men disappeared. Disheveled men staggered around in the street, clothes half torn from their bodies, bruised and bleeding. The saloon was a shambles, furniture wrecked, mirrors shattered. Blaze staggered across to the office carrying Sales, while behind him limped Frenchie, talking French so fast that he fairly spat words as a machine gun spits bullets. Frenchie's hat and shirt were gone, and his hair seemed to rise up like the roach on an angry grizzly bear. Blaze placed Sales on a cot and dashed a dipper of water into his face. Sales blinked painfully and opened his eyes. A man, bruised about the face and minus one sleeve of his shirt, came into the door and looked at Sales. He spat out through the aperture of missing teeth and tried to grin. Sales looked up at Blaze and then sat up on the cot, feeling tenderly of the swollen cut on his head. "How do you feel, Chuck?" asked the man. Sales squinted up past his crooked nose at the questioner. "That's the question to ask," grunted Sales, and then looked up at Blaze and asked, "Did I lick Kim Carlin?" "You did," Sales, "you sure did, and you licked him fair. Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Back east. I was a prize fighter once. That's where I got this lopsided nose." "What happened after somebody hit me?" "I got the bottle thrower," said the man. "He was a friend of Mora. This here Carlin saved you from being tramped to death, Chuck. I tried to get you, but I could go. No place in that millin' herd. I seen him pick you up and fight his way through. McCarty, Simpson, and Franklin got hammered up a lot, and Mickey Shannon stopped a bullet. But I think they'll all pull through." Sales held out his hand to Blaze. "I reckon you went out of your way to do this for me, Carlin. And I thank you to beat. I ain't thanked you for what you done for me over in the Eureka," smiled Blaze. "Just came out even," sighed Sales. "'Pears like I can never get nobody indebted to me. The luck." Dr. Brenton worked swiftly probing for bullets and binding up cuts and bruises. There was not enough left of the Square Deal saloon for the owner even to promise an opening within a week, so the regular habitués shifted their affections to the Eureka, the Double, Cinch, or the high-card gambling houses. The fight was the subject of conversation, and only seemed to add zest to the business of the night. Chuck Sales was a hero. He had accomplished the impossible. It was gossip that Chuck was formerly a prize fighter of the then bag and knuckle school, and he was favored of men. But Chuck wore his honors with the crooked smile and a bandage around his head. Fights were started over the merits of the punch which had made Black Mora as helpless as a child. Men loaded with bad whiskey demonstrated it upon their acquaintances, which caused many upset stomachs and not a little spilling of angry blood. Few men cared for fighting with their hands, preferring the more rapid methods which seldom ended in a draw decision. 4 of Morris's men had been patched up and went home, but 2 of them would never ride the ranges again. Only one of Sales' men, Mickey Shannon, was unable to partake of the festivities, and he would be riding again in a few days. Several others had been slightly injured in the melee. Luckily, the fight was held at short range, which made it impossible to shoot without danger of hitting friend as well as foe, otherwise the toll would have been very much greater. Blaze and Frenchy did not mix with the crowd, but stayed in the office. Both of them had received superficial cuts and bruises. There was no doubt that Black Mora would make reprisals if possible. He would have to do something desperate to wipe out the disgrace of that whipping, and his followers were likely in a mood to follow him on any undertaking. Frenchy had talked so much during the day that his throat was weary. It was the first time that Blaze had ever seen Frenchy tired of talking. He lay stretched out on a cot, puffing slowly on his old pipe and staring at the ceiling. Blaze walked slowly up and down the small room. On the table was a pile of weapons which Frenchy had collected that day, and surmounting the pile was Black Mora's belt and gun. Blaze took it from the holster and looked it over. It was a single-action .44 Colt with carved bone handle, depicting a running wolf. The figure of the animal was in relief. Below the animal was carved the initials, JLH. Black Mora packs another man's gun, observed Blaze, handing the weapon to Frenchy. Frenchy exhaled a cloud of smoke and examined the gun, peering at the delicate carving. "Somebody she's do plenty work on de handle," he observed, handing it back to Blaze, who replaced it in the holster. "I'm ting any man's fool to put name on de gun." Came a timid knock on the door, barely audible. Frenchy got off the cot and stretched his arms. From across the street came the sounds of dancing, singing, voices raised in shrill argument. Frenchy stepped to one side of the door while Blaze lifted the bar, drawing the door to him. A woman stepped quickly inside, and Blaze shut the door behind her. Blaze dropped the bar into place and faced the woman. It was the one who had laughed when he hit Blackmora, the woman who had turned away when he had lifted his hat to her on the Eureka balcony. Blaze bowed to her and indicated a chair. "Want you set down, ma'am?" The woman shook her head. "I've got to get back quick, but I had to ask you something. She glanced quickly around the room as if afraid to talk. She was less than 30 years of age, but hardened and haggard from her profession. Yet she appeared embarrassed. Beauty parlors were as yet unknown in the West, and the women of the dance halls had little time for more than a daub of paint, smeared in a grotesque imitation of the bloom of youth. Their hair frizzed with curling irons, which were heated in the chimney of an oil lamp, and decorated according to their own standards. This woman's dress was sparkling with cheap bangles and reeking with perfume, which is supposed to dull the senses of uncouth men and lead them to believe that this bone and a hank of hair is perfection personified. "Ma'am," said Blaze. "I'm glad to answer a question if I can." She hesitated for a moment as if thinking deeply. "I heard a man talking about you today. I think he runs one of the stores. He said that you found a man who had been hung." "Yes," nodded Blaze. "We did find one man that-a-way, at a little cabin in the gulch which leads to Cinnamon Creek." "Is Cinnamon Creek where Blackmora's ranch is?" asked Blaze. The woman nodded and compressed her lips. "I can try to describe the old man," volunteered Blaze, but the woman got to her feet with a gesture of dissent. She leaned on the table for a moment, and then turned, with her back to the table, her hands behind her, and looked at Blaze. "You heard what happened to Jack Wheeler?" she asked slowly. Blaze nodded. "Ma'am, it was awful, it sure was." She bit her lips as if to keep back the tears and walked back to the door. "I want to thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for answering my question, and for taking off your hat to me." She lifted the bar before Blaze could assist her and slipped out into the street. Blaze dropped the bar back into place and looked at Frenchie, who had never spoken while the woman was in the room. "What you know about that?" wondered Blaze. Frenchie whittled some tobacco from his plug and filled his pipe. He tamped the tobacco carefully and lit a sulfur match. "Can't you talk?" asked Blaze. Frenchie nodded his head. "Sure, I make talk, Blaze, but first I make tea. Ink. At you suppose she's take Black Morris gun for, eh?" "Black Morris gun?" parroted Blaze and stepped over to the table. The holster was empty. "She's take it when she's back against the table," explained Frenchie. "Why did you stop her?" Frenchie puffed thoughtfully. "Blaze, de woman no steal for de value of de gun, bagosh. De woman know some teeing. Maybe she's need gun, maybe she's take Blackmora's gun because his gun be a handies. Eh? Suppose he comes after his gun, Frenchie. We ain't got no right to keep his gun." Frenchie shook his head. "None. We got no right, Blaze, but I'm not worry. When Blackmora come for de gun, I make tink I am kill Blackmora. Chuck sales she's walked while for de fight. Beale McKeever she's supposed to be big man, but I'm got nothing against them two outlaw." A heavy hand banged against the door. There was nothing timid about this knock. "Who's out there?" asked Blaze. A voice answered, saying something about Delaney, the rest of it being drowned by the noise from the dance hall. Blaze cautiously opened the door. A man was standing there, his face shaded from the light. The light was behind Blaze and Frenchie, which left their faces in the shadow. "What was?" asked Blaze. "Delaney wants you to come to his house," stated the man. "The Wheeler woman wants to talk to you." The man half turned his head toward the dance hall as he finished his message. Without a sound, Frenchie sprang through the doorway into the man, and both of them crashed to the ground. For a moment, Blaze was stunned at the suddenness of Frenchie's actions, but sprang to his assistance. The man twisted and cursed, but the little Frenchman had pinned his arms. Blaze removed the man's gun and they dragged him inside and closed the door. The man sat on the floor and stared at them. Blaze let the full light of the lamp fall upon the man's face. It was the man whom Frenchie had booted at Cinnamon Creek, the man with mouse-colored hair and empty eye socket. He stared at, wonderingly, his eye wide open with fright. It suddenly occurred to Blaze that Mex Free had been killed before telling Mora that the two men had not been burned in the ranch house fire, and that this man did not know until now. The man's forehead had come in contact with the ground, and a trickle of blood was running into his remaining eye, but he made no move to wipe it away. He seemed bereft of motion or understanding. "I'm never forget the man I'm kick," stated Frenchie. "She's plant to trap, Blaze." "Delaney wants to see me, eh?" asked Blaze. The man looked at Blaze, but did not affirm nor deny the question. Frenchie leaned over the man, shoving his bearded face close and peering into the one eye. "Who sent you to lie?" asked Frenchie harshly, but the man was dumb. His eye stared straight ahead, as if visioning the punishment he expected. Frenchie stood up and looked at Blaze. "That you think, Blaze? This is Black Morris man for sure. Bring the message to come and see Delaney. Delaney never send him. Bargosh." Frenchie snapped his words as if anxious to get into action again. Blaze lifted a coiled rope from under the table and proceeded to hog-tie the one-eyed, who made no move to prevent it. Blaze roped him as only a cowboy can do the job, and when he was finished, the one-eyed outlaw was as secure as knots could make him. Not a word would the man speak, not even a curse. He was taking no chances. "Where you go?" asked Frenchie. "Delaney's place." "Know where it is?" "No. Maybe somebody show us." They closed the door behind them and went across the street. The closed Square Deal saloon made a dark spot in the otherwise lighted street. Two men met them as they reached the sidewalk, and Blaze recognized one of them as being the stableman. "Know where Delaney lives?" asked Blaze. The man had recognized Blaze and Frenchie and gave them the directions in a few words. Delaney lived a short distance from the business section, back on the slope of a hill. Blaze and Frenchie did not go cautiously, for the reason that Blaze believed that if it was an ambush, the outlaws might mistake Frenchie for their messenger in the dark and give them a chance to find out what they were up against. Dim light was burning in Delaney's front window. They were almost to the door when a voice said, "Good work, Blue." Men rose up from behind them, men who were unseen in the shadows of the fence, and who ringed Frenchie and Blaze from every avenue of escape except into the house. "The house," whispered Blaze. "Smash the window if the door is blocked." "Yeah." "I've got you where you want to kick for a while," gritted Blackmora's voice. Blaze whirled and fired at the figure, which he thought was Blackmora, while Frenchie's pistol spat flame in the other direction. The bushwhackers were taken by surprise, supposing that one of the two was their messenger, Al Blue. Blaze swung his gun from figure to figure, firing as fast as possible, while Frenchie emptied his gun into the bulk of the men, who were only a few feet from him. Oaths and cries of pain mingled with the crashing of pistols. Blaze felt a bullet tear through the flesh of his left forearm, while another bit deeply across his shoulder. His gun was empty. Frenchie had ceased to fire for the same reason. Straight for the door they ran, crashing into it together and splintering the cheap latch. It was a narrow hallway, opening each way into larger rooms. Blaze bounded back from the wall and threw himself against the door. Frenchie went to his knees and skidded almost into the right-hand room. For a moment, Blaze held the door with his shoulder, but he immediately dropped flat, braced his feet against the bottom of it, while he calmly shoved cartridges into his empty gun. Bullets splintered the door, waist-high to a man, but none of them came low enough to injure Blaze. Frenchie reloaded as fast as possible and crouched against the wall out of line with the door, cursing softly. "Did you get hit, Frenchie?" asked Blaze. "Lost piece from my ear and get bullet in the leg. I'm teink one boot she's get irrigate from the blood. How you come?" Got a slug through my left arm and one through my left shoulder, I think. Can't shut my hand very good. We kinda busted up the meetin', Frenchy. Never know dare be so much good time in de whirl, Blaze. Where you suppose everybody she's be? Where's Delaney and de female women, eh? Blaze crawled away from the door, which swung ajar for a few inches. Into the other room went Blaze, crawling softly in the dark. One room was partly lighted with the smoking oil lamp, but this one was in darkness. Blaze crawled slowly, reaching ahead as much possible, crawling like a three-legged animal. Suddenly his hand touched flesh. Like a flash, his pistol barrel bored into it, but there was no movement. Blaze reached out with his injured hand, not daring to take away the pistol, and felt tight ropes. "Frenchy," he called softly. "Come here, Frenchy." "Bagosh, I'm come," whispered Frenchy, and came limping softly into the room. "Light A." Match," whispered Blaze. Frenchy lighted a match, shading it with his hands. On the floor lay Delaney, trussed with ropes, gagged with a dirty rag, and with a hangman's noose around his neck. He had been bruised about the head, but his eyes were open. Blaze cut his bonds and ripped away the gag. For a moment Delaney was unable to move, but he struggled to a sitting position as the match flared. "Out." "Where are the women?" asked Blaze softly. Delaney seemed unable to talk, and when he did regain speech it was barely a weak whisper. "Gone. They stole them. Said they'd hang me as soon as they got you, Carlin." "Shake yourself," ordered Blaze. "Where have the women gone? Why did Mora's gang come here?" "Mrs. Gang come here," whispered Delaney. Black Mora wanted her. Those were Morris's men in the store when she came there. She knew it was Mora's gang that killed Jack. Mora killed him to get her. He knew she did tell me who got Jack, and Mora was afraid. "I heard him send the message to you. Mora's face is cut to ribbons, where Sales beat him. He said he was going to hang us both to the same limb." "He's got your wife, ain't he?" asked Blaze. "We were all here when they broke in." "As Blaze, we were all here when they broke in," whispered Delaney. Mora grabbed Mrs. Wheeler. Delaney got to his feet, mumbling to himself. Blaze moved back toward the front door, his footsteps muffled in the heavy rag carpet. The oil lamp was guttering in the other room, casting a yellow light over the walls. The half-open door began to squeak as someone shoved it gently from the outside. The sound of a husky whisper came to Blaze's ears. Blaze covered the edge of the door with his pistol. Suddenly, a man's body moved into view, but before Blaze could shoot, a streak of flame shot from Frenchy's gun, and the man dropped to the floor. "Bagosh, you maybe wait too long sometime, Blaze," said Frenchy softly. They listened, waited. Outside came a shrill whistle, and a moment later, the sound of galloping horses. Blaze took a chance, hurdled the man in the doorway, and sprang into the yard. By the dim light from the moon, he could see men riding away. 2 horsemen swung past him, coming from the rear of the house. Blaze emptied his pistol as the horses thundered past. One of the men cursed and fired back. 50 feet beyond, the horses seemed to crash together and go down. Frenchy and Delaney joined him. Blaze had watched, but could not tell whether the horsemen had gone to town or not. "Mora gave up trying to get us," said Blaze. "He's taken the women with him, I think. He's lost too many men already, and he knows we are still alive. Look out for them too out there by the horses. They may have some fight left." They separated and started for the spot where the horses had fallen. A few feet away, Blaze stumbled over the body of a man, which proved that Morris's surprise party had not worked out as he had planned. They found the horses, one dead, the other crippled, but there was no sign of the 2 men. The 3 men stood there, undecided. Far away, they could hear the music from the dance halls, soft and as indefinite as the light from the fleece-covered moon. The saddle creaked on the crippled horse as the animal started to move away. Far back in the hills, a coyote lifted its voice in lamentation. "Bagosh, She's the peaceful night, breathed Frenchy. I'm lack to go to sleep, Blaze. How does the leg feel, Frenchy? Not feel much. I'm not think she's belong to me. My boot squash all the time. How's the arm? Can't lift it, said Blaze. Weighs a ton. Buck up. Frenchy. We've got to get Black Mora tonight. She's a fact, said Frenchy. We got 3 good leg and 3 good hand left, which make plenty fun, bagosh. My wife, exclaimed Delaney suddenly, as if he had just awakened. My butt. He trotted toward the town with Blaze and Frenchy following painfully behind. Delaney got shocked, I reckon, muttered Blaze. He's just remembering things, Frenchy. Kill, muttered Frenchy complainingly, as if talking to himself. Dey bad man must be killed before the country she's good to live here. Blaze knew that Frenchy was weakening from the loss of blood. His voice was halting, and his left leg seemed to drag. Suddenly Frenchy increased his pace and his voice boomed out. Ho, 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 bar gosh! All the time I'm a make tea, ink of day. Squash inside the boot. To wet the squash. First we get Mora, then we sleep. Ho, 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 good man, grunted Blaze, gritting his teeth over his throbbing shoulder and arm. We'll clean them up, old partner. Frenchy stumbled and almost fell to his knees. Hurrah for... Blaze steadied him with his good arm and Frenchy laughed, foolishly. They reached the street and headed for the Eureka, passing the other places. Frenchy was weaving, stumbling, but Blaze helped him along. Into the saloon they went and men stepped aside to let them through. The woman, who had stolen Mora's gun, was standing on a platform, singing, but stopped when she saw Blaze and Frenchy, who came up near the platform. The violin quit in the middle of a bar of music. Blaze faced the crowd, lifting his good hand as a signal for silence. The room stilled in a moment, except for the shuffling of feet. Frenchy was hunched from weariness, but watched the crowd, with his right hand near the butt of his gun. Men, said Blaze hollowly, you know us. We were cleaning up this town. Sales was standing near the bar, and now he moved closer to Blaze. From back in the crowd came a voice. Look out you don't drown in your own suds, Black Mora. And his men stole 2 women and a little girl tonight. Blaze's voice was cool. Black Mora is the leader of the cutthroat gang, who are posing as vigilantes. No man or woman is safe while his gang are alive. The crowd received this statement silently. A man pushed his way to the front and faced Blaze. He was a tall, gaunt figure of a man, yellow as old ivory. His taffy-colored hair was matted, and a long, greasy lock curved over his forehead and almost to the bridge of his nose. His eyes were cavernous, and the light from the hanging lamps made deep hollows under his cheekbones. A yellow muffler around his neck seemed to increase the sallowness of his face. Blaze had never seen this man before. Talk to him, McKeever, urged a man behind him. Blaze knew that this was Bill McKeever, a partner of Buck Law, whom Frenchy had shot. Got gunned up, and now you were looking for help, eh? Drawled McKeever. Bit off more and you can chaw, and now you were hunting for sympathy. Well, you won't get a bit of it hereabouts. I ain't to forgot Buck Law, and by, if ya wasn't too crippled, it's my left hand, McKeever, replied Blaze coldly. I use my right hand for shooting. Had plenty of shooting today, but if you must have it. McKeever was moving as Blaze spoke. His hand streaked to his gun, drew swiftly, but his gun exploded into the ceiling. Blaze had shaded him just enough to send a bullet ripping through McKeever's knuckles, scoring his forearm, and burning across the ribs of the man who had urged McKeever on. The crowd split with a rush, but above it all came Chuck Sale's voice. Steady, steady. Carlin stopped him. Gents, no use of any more trouble. McKeever staggered back, nursing his shattered hand, cursing impotently, his nerve gone. Then Sales sprang to the platform, shouting, "Listen to me, you bunch of mangy coyotes! Stay here and suck a bottle, and be yeah! Dance, you whelps, while that offspring of the devil runs away with good women. Me and my men ride with the law tonight, and when we come back, we grow to help the sheriff do the rest of his washing." 7 men, including Blaze and Frenchie, followed Sales out of the saloon, plowing their way through the crowd, which split wide open to let them through. "Horses are at the hitch rack," cried Sales. "We'll find enough to carry us." Frenchie was staggering, and Blaze put an arm around his shoulder. "Keep going, pardner," urged Blaze. "Bar gosh, I'm go," declared Frenchie weakly. "I'm go, but de legs she's forget how to lift up. I'm tired like." Blaze Carlin. Sales and his men were ahead. Blaze and Frenchie were passing the front of the deserted Square Deal saloon when Frenchie jerked to a stop and almost fell. "You hear dat, Blaze? You hear de woman scream?" "Keep going, Frenchie," urged Blaze. "There was no woman screaming, old pardner." "I hear," declared Frenchie stubbornly, stumbling toward the door of the deserted saloon. "She sound like somebody choke off to scream." Blaze stepped to the smashed window, across which had been nailed strips of boards, and tried to peer into the blackness. There was moonlight enough to show that the back door was open, and against the moonlit strip of the rear door moved the figures of men. Blaze turned to Frenchie, who was trying to see inside, and gripped him tight. "Stand here, Frenchie," he whispered fiercely. Black Mora was sure we'd go to his ranch to find him, and he's holed up in here, where nobody'd think to look for him. Maybe he was afraid we'd catch him in the hills. Do you understand, Frenchie? Blaze shook him by the arm. "They got them women in there. If Wolf Butte went hunting Black Mora, he'd be right here to raise with the town while we was gone. Do you know what I mean? You think I'm a fool entire, Blaze?" Frenchie's voice was cold. Dizzy, as sick from loss of blood, yet his will was stronger than his flesh. "You get Sales," ordered Frenchie. "We smashed this Black Mora, bagosh." Blaze trotted up the street, where men were mounting horses at the hitch rack. "Sales!" cried Blaze. "Chuck Sales. This is Carlin." "Here's a horse for you, Carlin," answered Sales. "Wait," panted Blaze. He stepped in beside Sales and told him what they had discovered. "Tie your horses," ordered Sales sharply, calling to his men who had already mounted. "Turn them loose, do anything, but hurry." None of them took time to tie their horses, and in a few moments crowded around their leader and Blaze. Sales gave them the information in a few words. "Be careful," he added. "There's 2 women and a little girl in there, and we don't want them hurt." "On is Jack Wheeler's wife," said one of the men. "She's fed me 3 times. "I know Jack," said another. "They hung a grindstone around his neck and throwed him in the creek. Black Mora swore he'd steal her," declared Blaze. "We'll split into 2 bunches," said Sales. "Slim, you and Flat go with Carlin to the front where the sheriff is. The rest of us will go to the—" "Give us time to get there, will ya, Carlin? I'll let out a war whoop when we arrive. They'll think I'm just drunk." Blaze and his 2 men went down the street, walking slowly so as not to arrive much ahead of Sales and his men. They found Frenchie braced against a corner of the building. Blaze put his hand on Frenchie's shoulder and shook him. "You think I'm asleep?" growled Frenchie. "Tack off de boot and pour out de squash. Squash. And I'm can't get de boot on no more, bagosh." "Stay with her, pardner," encouraged Blaze. "We'll go to bed when this here thing is over." "Day bed," muttered Frenchie. "Dat's de good word, Blaze. I am tire like, but de work must be do." From the rear of the building floated the eerie war whoop, which Sales had promised as a signal. Blaze peered into the building just in time to see the door close, cutting off the moonlight from the rear. From inside came the dull thump of a 6-shooter. Footsteps rattled across the floor, and a man darted to the front window, and then dropped to the floor. "Get down!" he yelled, followed by unprintable oaths. They were at the front too. Another voice cursed feelingly, and a bullet whizzed out through the half-boarded window. We've got you trapped, stated Blaze. You can get away. Throw your guns out of the window and come out with your hands up. But there was no response. The men knew only too well what it meant. There would be scant mercy for any of them, and Morris's men would rather die fighting than on the gallows. Mora laughed mockingly. He was at the end of his rope, but would not admit it as long as he lived. Blaze grasped one of the boards and tore it off the window. Bullets splintered through the board, but did no damage. Blaze ripped them all off, which left the large window unprotected. What? The idea? Asked one of Sale's men. You ain't going in, are you? May have to, said Blaze calmly. Carlin, shouted Black Mora. Do you hear me? Go ahead, said Blaze. Talk fast. I've got 2 women in here, stated Black Mora. I'll make a trade with you, Carlin. You let me and my men get out and get away, and I'll give you the women and the kid. Talk fast or the deal's off. We go free, or by the women and kid get what you give us, Sabi. No gut, declared Frenchie weakly. Don, truss him, Blaze. Go to the rear and tell Sales to try to smash in the door, whispered Blaze to one of the men. Tell him to hit it hard. The man ran to the corner and circled the building. Blaze ducked below the windowsill and crept in close. Well, are you goin' to talk business? Growled Mora. There was a note of uneasiness in his voice, as if his nerves were badly worn. Blaze did not reply. Suddenly, there was a crash at the rear door, which threatened to tear the door from its hinges. Blaze shot upright, vaulted through the window, and dropped flat on the floor. He had succeeded in attracting all the attention to the rear, and not a man in the building had seen him come in. The blows were shattering the door, tearing off the hinges. Pistols flashed and bullets thudded into the door, but the door was too thick for the bullets to injure the men outside, who were using a wagon wheel for a battering ram. The pistol flashes momentarily lighted the place for Blaze, and he was able to locate the women, who were bound and sitting upright against the top of an overturned table. Blaze crawled to them, while Black Mora and his men expended ammunition against the door and cursed brokenly. Blaze reached the women and touched one of them on the head to satisfy himself that he was not mistaken. Go out the front, ordered Mora. That door won't last another smash. Jump out the window and take a chance. Women. Blaze was on his feet now, crouched in front of the women, and Mora's groping hands touched him. Who in? Grunted Mora. Blaze clubbed his gun, striking at Mora's head with the barrel, but he misjudged direction and struck Mora's shoulder, eliciting a yelp of pain. Mora flung himself forward, encircling Blaze with both arms. As they crashed to the floor, there came a sound of splintering wood as the door gave way, the shouts of men, the thudding of pistols. Blaze went down with Mora on top of him, clawing, biting, striking blindly. Blaze drew up his knees as he fell, and was thus able to prevent Mora from reaching his throat. His wounded arm was caught under Mora's knee, and his shoulder came in contact with a table leg. Mora slackened his frenzied attempt to reach Blaze's throat and grasped Blaze by the knees, trying to throw them aside. Like a flash, Blaze rolled sidewise, landed on his knees and sprang to his feet. Mora clawed himself upright, cursing hoarsely. Outside, a conflict seemed to rage, but Blaze and Mora had the room to themselves. Blaze had lost his gun, and he knew that Mora must be in the same fix. This thought was only a flash, for Mora dived into him again. Blaze smashed him with a right-hand swing, but Mora growled hoarsely and grappled Blaze around the waist. Weakened as he was, Blaze was no match for Mora in this kind of fighting, yet he continued to drive short blows to Mora's already disfigured face. They crashed into an upturned chair and went down, fighting with tooth and nail. Mora's breath was sobbing into Blaze's ear, and there seemed to be little pressure from Mora's left arm. Blaze wondered if the blow from the pistol barrel had not injured Mora's shoulder. Blaze was almost exhausted, but he fought savagely. He managed to get his fist beneath Mora's chin, driving upward with every ounce of his strength. Mora groaned, and that groan was his undoing. Blaze laughed. He was a better man than Mora. Blaze laughed aloud, a wheezing chuckle. Mora blubbered a curse and tried to get his fingers around Blaze's throat, but Blaze tore his hand away and ground the heel of his palm into Mora's nose. Suddenly Mora surged away from him and started to get to his feet. Blaze laughed again and tried to revile Mora for being a coward, but his vocal cords refused to function. Very well, he would get up too, and they could fight more. It was hard work, this getting up, but he managed to get to his feet. He struck at Mora, but Mora did not fight back. Mora almost fell out of the rear door, which was splintered and sagging. Blaze staggered after him, shoving Mora toward the rear of the Eureka. Once Mora stopped and tried to go the other way, but Blaze struck him in the neck, struck him with a fist which would not stay clenched, and Mora whimpered like a beaten puppy. The front of Mora's shirt was splotched with blood, where a bullet had ripped through the muscles, and there was a jagged furrow across his neck, where another chunk of hot lead had barely missed its kill. Mora stumbled into the rear door of the Eureka. He stopped, but Blaze bumped into him, shoving him ahead. The room was in a turmoil. Sales, pistol in hand, a bloody smear across his face, had his left hand twisted into the collar of a man and was holding him against the bar. Another man was lying on the floor, with Frenchie standing astride of him, his knees half bent, mouth wide open, but still gripping his big Colt. Dangerous as an old crippled wolf, two of Sales' men were holding another man against a card table. The crowd had given them plenty of room. Straight ahead staggered Mora, head down and weaving like a wounded animal, while behind him came Blaze, scarcely able to lift his feet. A group of dance hall girls scattered to let Mora through. He came to a stop near Frenchie. "He did get away," croaked Sales. Frenchie threw up his head and looked at Mora. "Ho, ho, ho," Frenchie's voice rasped weakly. "Tak look everybody, the big one, she's come to be judged." Suddenly a woman, the woman who had stolen Mora's gun, rushed past Blaze. She stopped a few feet from Mora, her right hand buried in the folds of her dress. Her face was white with fury, her penciled eyes gleamed green in the murky light, and her carmined lips were a thin, red line, barely discernible. For a moment she stared at Black Mora. He seemed about to speak to her, but she forestalled him. "Black Mora, I've waited for you. You made me what I am because I was afraid of you, but I am not afraid of you now." She brushed her hand across her brow, as if to clear her thoughts. "My old father, you killed him, Black Mora. He came to this country to kill you for what you done to me, and you and your men hung him. He was old and crippled, but you feared him. You and your vigilantes. Ha ha ha, you told me you would run this country, and that you would marry me. You wanted Jack Wheeler's wife, so you murdered him." Mora's mouth was wide open, and his breath was jerking from his lips, but no protest came from him. Cold fear gripped his heart. The crowd made no move. Blaze listened dully, as if to an oft-told tale, wishing that the woman would keep still so he could sleep. Frenchie was swaying on his feet, fighting to keep above the man, who had turned on his side and was staring at Mora, as if wondering if his chief could save him. "You wanted power," continued the woman, without a trace of inflection in her voice. "Power, women! Ha ha ha!" Her lips barely opened to emit the cackling laugh, and the lines of her face did not change. "Women, Mora, you dictate what breed. You lied to me. You killed my father and stole his gun. Listen to me, Mora. You said that my voice pleased you more than any you ever heard. Listen to it, because it's the last voice you'll ever hear. My father's gun, Mora. His initials are on the handle, Jack Henderson, whom the Indians called Running Wolf. He carved his hate into those handles, but he loved the gun. because it was to kill you. You hear me, Mora? Her voice was almost a scream. I've got that gun, Mora. Pray quick! Mora threw out his arm blindly. Blaze lurched to grasp the woman, but her hand came up swiftly, the skirt still covering the muzzle of the gun. Just once it roared. Mora jerked back, seemed to collapse like a bundle of rags, and crashed to the floor. The woman dropped the gun and staggered back against the bar, her flimsy dress flaming. She screamed as Blaze grabbed her and swung her around. His ebbing strength flared up as his hand grasped her bodice, and with one jerk he ripped off her gown and sent her spinning into the group of hysterical girls. Blaze kicked the flaming dress to the center of the room. For a moment there was silence. Then came a dull thump. Frenchy Ditto had fallen to his knees, straddling his, captive, clutching him with both hands. "The job is done." Frenchy's voice was barely audible. "Day bad man, she's all rough in Wolf Butte, and I'm ver tire of de squash, squash, squash." Frenchy slid forward across his man, face down. Blaze tried to go to him, but the room whirled. In a dull sort of a way, he seemed to feel hands grasping him and carrying him away. It seemed good to move without effort. Suddenly the hands seemed to release him. His body stiffened to take the shock, which did not come. Then he opened his eyes. He was in a strange room. Across from him he could see another bed, around which a blue cloud seemed to hover. He tried to move, but his left side seemed to be bandaged tightly. After a moment's reflection, he lifted his head. A man was standing at a window, while another was humped over, sitting in a chair. Footsteps were coming up the hall. The man got out of his chair and went to the door. For a few moments there was a whispered conversation. The door closed, and the man came toward the foot of the bed. It was Chuck Sales. He glanced at Blaze, and a glad smile lighted up his homely features. He dropped a heavy object on a table and came quickly to the head of the bed. "Carlin," he said, "I'm danged glad to see you're with your eyes open." "Bah gosh!" came an exclamation from the smoke-enshrouded bed across the room. "Blaze, are you wake up?" "Hello, old pardner," called Blaze weakly. The other man came to Blaze. It was Judge Whalen. He looked down at Blaze, a glad smile in his eyes. "You might tell me about it," suggested Blaze. "Doc Brenton told me to keep you quiet," stated Sales. "But I don't reckon a little tellin' is goin' to hurt ye any. Women wasn't hurt none, and Morris' gang is completely wiped out. Wolf Butte is tamed, Carlin." "Do you mean that?" queried Blaze. "Did all that killin' do any good?" The judge picked up the small table and carried it around to where Blaze could see it. On it were at least 20 pistols. Sales lifted the top two and smiled down at Blaze. "These two just came in. There ain't nobody down there to make 'em give up their guns. But they were all doing it. I'm taking it upon myself to look out for you two. But I wish you'd hurry up and get well. A few more days of this civilized town, and I won't have a horse thief left to follow me. You fellas sure did put one awful crimp in my business." Sales walked back to the window, and the judge sat down on the edge of the bed. "Carlin, you can realize what you have done," said the judge softly, and then added, "You and Ditto. It will be years before Wolf Butte will be anything except a border town, but it will be an orderly border town, a town where good men and women may live in peace. You took the only method of making it, change its ways, and, well, we want to try to thank you." "You're welcome, Judge," said Blaze simply. "I'm sure had one gran time me," stated Frenchy. "Nobody she's have to thank Frenchy Ditto, bagosh. Because I'm enjoy Everett ing, you bet. You fighting son of a gun," laughed Sales and pointed out of the window. "Here comes more artillery. Reckon I'd better get my gang and drag out of here before a preacher hits town." Blaze grinned contentedly and stared up at the ceiling. He had done something for the country, something worthwhile, and he was glad. Here, the story comes to an end. If you enjoy quality English audiobooks uploaded regularly, be sure to subscribe to Driven to Win Audiobook. From timeless classics to modern masterpieces, you'll find them all here. Thank you for listening to Driven to Win Audiobook.